Mara Caldwell's life shattered in seconds. There was twisted metal, broken bones, and a pregnancy she didn't know existed. But waking up in a hospital suite that cost more than she'd earned in years was just the beginning. The man standing in the shadows wasn't her savior. He was Adrian Volkov, the most dangerous crime boss in the city, and the father of her baby had just stolen a fortune from Adrian and vanished. Now Adrian's offering her protection, a new life, and a deal she can't refuse. But in his world, nothing comes for free. The first thing Mara Caldwell noticed when she opened her eyes was the ceiling. It was pristine white, smooth as porcelain, with recessed lighting that glowed as soft as moonlight. It wasn't the water-stained tiles of her studio apartment. It also wasn't the flickering fluorescence of the diner, where she'd worked double shifts for 3 years. This was expensive. The second thing she noticed was the pain. It radiated through her left leg like lightning trapped in bone. When she tried to move, her ribs screamed in protest. Her right arm was in a cast, elevated on pillows so soft they felt like clouds. A woman's crisp and professional voice told her to take it easy. A middle-aged nurse with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses appeared at her bedside. She told Mara that she'd been through quite an ordeal and should try not to move too much. Mara's throat felt like sandpaper. She asked where she was. The nurse explained she was in the St. Catherine's Medical Center private wing. She adjusted the IV drip with practiced efficiency and said Mara had been there for 2 days after being in a car accident. The memories crashed back in fragments. Headlights, the screech of tires, her car spinning like a top, and the sickening crunch of impact. Then there was nothing but darkness and distant sirens. Mara whispered, asking about her car. She said she was driving home from work. The nurse gently explained that the other driver ran a red light and T-boned her right through the intersection. She said Mara was lucky to be alive. Lucky, Mara almost laughed, but it hurt too much. Lucky would have been avoiding the accident altogether. Lucky would have been having enough money in her bank account to cover whatever astronomical bill this hospital stay was racking up. Lucky would have been a lot of things she'd never been. Anxiety spiked through the fog of painkillers. Mara said she needed to know how much this cost. She explained that she didn't have insurance and couldn't afford it. The nurse's tone left no room for argument as she replied that it was taken care of. Mara asked what she meant by taken care of. The nurse explained that all of her medical expenses had been covered. Everything, including surgery, medication, and rehabilitation. Mara's heart hammered against her broken ribs as she asked who had done it. The nurse hesitated, her professional mask slipping for just a moment. She said she thought it was better if Mr. Volkov explained that himself, and that he'd been waiting to speak with her. Mara said she didn't know anyone by that name. The nurse, clearly eager to escape, was already moving toward the door, saying she would let him know Mara was awake. Mara tried to sit up, but the pain was too much. She fell back against the pillows, breathing hard, her mind racing. Volkov. The name meant nothing to her. She'd never heard it before in her life. 5 minutes later, the door opened again, but it wasn't the nurse. The man who entered was tall, at least 6'3". He moved with the kind of deliberate control that made Mara think of predators. He had dark hair swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and cold beauty, the kind of face that belonged on old Russian propaganda posters or Italian Renaissance paintings of fallen angels. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car, her former car, and a watch that caught the light like captured stars. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. They were gray like a winter sky before a storm, and completely, utterly emotionless. His voice was deep, with what she thought was a Russian accent. It somehow made her name sound like both a threat and a promise. He said, "Miss Caldwell, I'm glad to see you're awake." She asked who he was. He introduced himself as Adrian Volkov. He moved to the chair beside her bed, sitting with a grace that suggested barely leashed violence. He explained that his driver was responsible for her accident. Mara blinked, repeating, "Your driver?" Adrian said his driver had run the red light, and that he's been dealt with. Something in the way he said "dealt with" made ice slide down her spine. He continued, saying that it doesn't change what happened to her. He listed her extensive injuries: broken ribs, a fractured femur, and a shattered radius. He added that the surgery to repair her leg took 6 hours. Mara's voice sounded small as she said she couldn't pay for any of this. She told him she worked at Pete's Diner, making $9 an hour plus tips. She had no insurance, no savings, and maybe $300 in her checking account. Adrian's tone was neutral, but something in his gaze sharpened. He said he was aware of her financial situation, and that's why he'd taken responsibility for all medical costs. He assured her she wouldn't receive a single bill. Mara stared at him. In her experience, powerful, wealthy, dangerous people like him didn't just pay for things out of the goodness of their hearts. She asked why. He replied that it was because his employee nearly killed her, and he takes care of problems his organization creates. Organization. The word hung in the air between them like smoke. Mara had lived in the city long enough to know what that meant, to recognize the careful euphemism. She couldn't quite make herself say it. The ghost of a smile touched his lips, there and gone in an instant. He told her he operated in sectors that aren't strictly legal, but he wasn't there to frighten her. He was there because there was something else they needed to discuss. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a piece of paper, and unfolded it with careful precision. Even upside down, Mara could see the grainy black and white image. It was an ultrasound. Her ultrasound. Adrian said quietly that the doctors ran several tests when she was admitted as standard procedure for trauma cases. They needed to know if she was pregnant before administering certain medications. Mara's world tilted. She could only say, "What?" Adrian informed her she was 8 weeks pregnant and asked if she knew. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. 8 weeks, 2 months. That would make it. The doctor said she'd likely been experiencing symptoms. Adrian continued, watching her with those cold, unreadable eyes. Fatigue, nausea. He suggested she probably attributed them to stress. Mara had. She'd been so tired lately and felt sick every morning. But she'd thought it was just the double shifts, just the stress of trying to keep her head above water in a city that wanted to drown her. She whispered that she couldn't be pregnant. She couldn't afford to be pregnant. Adrian stated that, nevertheless, she was. He set the ultrasound on the bedside table. He then said this brought them to a more pressing question, and asked who the father was. The way he asked made it clear the answer would matter. It would change things. Mara's hands were shaking. She asked why he cared. He explained that in his line of work, connections and relationships matter. And if the father of her child was someone he needed to know about, then he needed to know about him now. Marcus. The name exploded in her mind like a gunshot. Marcus Chen, with his easy smile, expensive clothes, and promises that had felt like lifelines when she was drowning. Marcus, who'd swept into her life 3 months ago like a whirlwind, and swept out just as fast. He left nothing but his number, which no longer worked, and apparently a baby she hadn't known existed. She said quietly that his name was Marcus Chen, but he was gone. He'd left town 6 weeks ago, and she hadn't heard from him since. The change in Adrian was instantaneous. His entire body went rigid, every muscle suddenly taut as a steel cable. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He repeated the name Marcus Chen, and there was something terrible in his voice now. It made Mara want to press herself back into the pillows and disappear. He asked if she was certain. She said yes, and asked why, if he knew him. Adrian stood abruptly. He moved to the window with the controlled fury of a caged animal. When he spoke, his voice was soft, deadly soft. He said that Marcus Chen stole $12 million from him 6 weeks ago. It was cash that belonged to his organization. He'd killed 2 of his men in the process and vanished. The words hit Mara like physical blows. She said no, that it wasn't possible. Marcus was a businessman who said he worked in imports. Adrian turned back to face her, his eyes no longer cold. They burned. He told her Marcus worked for him. He was an accountant with access to certain funds, and he betrayed that trust. He murdered 2 men who tried to stop him. One of them had a wife and 3 children, and he disappeared with money that wasn't his. Mara felt bile rising in her throat. She said she didn't know, swearing she didn't know anything about that. Adrian's voice softened fractionally. He said he believed her. Marcus was skilled at deception. He made people trust him. It was his greatest talent. She asked why he was telling her this. Adrian moved back to the chair. He sat again, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He explained it was because she was carrying the child of a man he'd been hunting for 6 weeks. A man who'd cost him millions and 2 lives, and when he found him, not if, but when, he would make him answer for what he's done. Fear crawled up Mara's spine. She asked what would happen to her and her baby. Adrian said slowly that it depended on what she chose. Choose. He said he could walk away right now, leave her with her hospital bills paid, and wish her luck. She'd be on her own with no job, no money, no way to support herself or the child when it arrived. She'd probably lose her apartment within a month and end up in a shelter or worse. Each word was a knife because he was right. Without this hospital miracle, she'd been 2 paychecks away from homelessness even before the accident. Or, Adrian continued, she could accept his help. Mara's laugh was bitter as she asked what kind of help. He offered protection, a safe place to live, and medical care throughout her pregnancy and after. He also offered a job that paid enough to actually support her and her child. She asked why he would do any of that. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was strange and distant, as if he were seeing something far away. He explained that Marcus Chen made this child part of his world, whether she wanted it or not. And in his world, they protect what's theirs. This baby was connected to a man who stole from him and killed his people. That made it his responsibility. Mara pointed out that the baby didn't ask for any of this. Adrian's gaze met hers. He said neither did she, which was why he was offering her a choice rather than making demands. She could take the help he was offering, or she could refuse it. But he wanted her to understand that if she refused, Marcus would still be looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life. However short that might be, and if he ever tried to contact her to claim this child, he'd be walking into a trap. Mara's head was spinning. This was insane. All of it. 2 days ago, her biggest problem had been whether she could afford new tires for her car. Now she was pregnant with the child of a thief and murderer, and a Russian mob boss was offering to, what, adopt her? She said she needed time to think. Adrian rose smoothly to his feet, saying, of course. He mentioned the doctor said she'd be there for at least another week. He would return in 3 days for her answer. He was almost to the door when Mara found her voice again. She called out his name, Mr. Volkov. He paused and turned back. She asked why he really cared about her, about this baby. She pointed out that he could just make her disappear if he was a problem. Adrian regarded her with something that might have been respect. He said he could, but he doesn't make war on pregnant women and children. That's not the kind of man he is. She then asked what kind of man he was. His smile was as sharp as broken glass. He said he was a dangerous one, but not to her. Not unless she gave him a reason to be. Then he was gone, leaving Mara alone with the ultrasound image and a choice that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. The next 3 days passed in a blur of medication, physical therapy, and spiraling thoughts. The nurses were kind, the doctors competent, and the food was better than anything Mara could have afforded on her own. Every night she lay awake in the darkness, staring at the ultrasound photo someone had placed on her bedside table. 8 weeks. A cluster of cells that would become a person. A baby who would need food, shelter, and safety. Everything Mara didn't have the ability to provide. She thought about Marcus, trying to reconcile the charming, attentive, and generous man she'd known with what Adrian had described. A thief, a murderer. It should have been impossible, but she'd only known Marcus for a few weeks before he'd left. She'd been so lonely and so desperate for connection that she'd ignored the warning signs. Things like the vague answers about his work, the way he paid for everything in cash, and the phone calls he'd take in another room, speaking in rapid Mandarin. She'd been a fool, and now she was paying for it. On the morning of the 3rd day, Adrian returned. He looked exactly the same as before, with his expensive suit, cold eyes, and controlled power. But this time he wasn't alone. 2 men in dark suits, clearly security, flanked him and stationed themselves outside her door. Adrian sat in the same chair as before and asked if she had made a decision. Mara had barely slept. Her leg throbbed despite the medication, and her head felt stuffed with cotton, but her mind was clear on this one point. She asked slowly that if she said yes, what exactly would that mean? What would he expect from her? Adrian said immediately that he expected honesty. If Marcus contacted her, she would tell him. If she remembered anything about where he might have gone, she would tell him. Beyond that, she should focus on staying healthy and having a safe pregnancy. And after the baby was born, she would continue working, raising her child, and living her life. She asked if that would be under his protection. He confirmed it would be. So what did that mean exactly? Guards following her everywhere, checking in with him constantly. Adrian said she would have security that kept her safe, but didn't interfere with her daily life. She'd have an apartment in one of his buildings, with good schools nearby when the time came. She'd also have medical care and a job at one of his legitimate businesses. He mentioned he owned several art galleries, and she could work the front desk, handling customers. He described it as easy work that pays well. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. Mara bluntly asked what the catch was. Adrian's lips twitched. He called it a smart question. The catch, he explained, was that she'd be in his world. People would know she was under his protection, and that came with certain implications. Mara guessed they would probably think she was his mistress, and asked if he was okay with that. He said he didn't care what people think, but he wanted her to understand what she was agreeing to. His world was dangerous. He had enemies, rivals, and people who would hurt her to get to him. The protection he was offering was necessary, not optional. Mara closed her eyes. Every instinct she had screamed that this was a trap, that accepting help from a man like Adrian Volkov would come at a price she couldn't afford to pay. But what choice did she have? She was broken, pregnant, and broke. Without his help, she'd lose everything, including probably her baby. The state didn't look kindly on homeless mothers. She whispered, "Okay." She said she would accept his help. When she opened her eyes, Adrian was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. He asked if she was certain. She said no, but she didn't see another option. He replied that there are always options, but most of them are just worse. He stood, reaching into his jacket to pull out a card. He set it on the bedside table next to the ultrasound. He told her that when she was discharged, his people would move her into her new apartment. Everything she needed would be provided. The number on the card reached him directly, day or night, and she should use it if she needed anything. Mara said thank you, though the words felt strange in her mouth. She wasn't sure if she was thanking him or sealing her fate. Adrian paused at the door, turning back one last time. He had one more thing to say. If Marcus did contact her, when he contacted her, she shouldn't be fooled. Whatever he told her, whatever promises he made, she should remember what he is. A liar, a thief, and a killer. He told her not to let him convince her otherwise. She promised she wouldn't. Adrian nodded once, then disappeared through the door, his security detail falling into step behind him. And Mara was alone again, staring at the business card with its embossed lettering. Adrian Volkov, proprietor. No company name, no title, just his name and a phone number. She picked up the ultrasound photo, studying the grainy image. Somewhere in that blur of black and white was her future. A child who would grow up in the shadow of their father's crimes, and under the protection of a man who commanded fear like other people commanded respect. She whispered to the tiny cluster of cells, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you're stuck with me as a mother." But she would do better. She had to. This baby deserved a chance at a good life, even if that life started in the most unlikely of circumstances. Mara spent 2 more weeks in the hospital. Physical therapy was brutal. She was learning to walk again on her repaired leg and building strength in her broken arm. The therapist pushed her hard, but they were kind about it. And she appreciated their honesty about the long recovery ahead. True to his word, Adrian had taken care of everything. She never saw a single bill. When she asked nurses about her account balance, they just smiled and said it was settled. It felt surreal, like existing in a dream where normal rules didn't apply. Adrian himself visited twice more. Once, to check on her progress. He'd sat quietly while her physical therapist put her through her paces, watching with those unreadable gray eyes. The second time, he came to inform her that Marcus had been spotted in Seattle. He'd vanished again before his people could reach him. Adrian's voice was cold as he said that Marcus knew he was looking for him and was running scared. Mara hadn't known what to say to that. Part of her hoped Marcus would run forever and disappear completely. But she knew from the set of Adrian's jaw that he wouldn't stop hunting. Men like Adrian didn't let debts go unpaid. On the day of her discharge, 2 of Adrian's security team arrived with a wheelchair and instructions to take her to her new home. Mara had expected something nice since Adrian clearly had money, but she wasn't prepared for the reality. The building was in the Riverside district, a place Mara had only ever gone to stare at store windows she couldn't afford to enter. It was 15 stories of glass and steel with a doorman who nodded to the security team like he knew exactly who they worked for. The apartment was on the 8th floor. When they wheeled her inside, Mara forgot how to breathe. Floor-to-soiling windows overlooked the river. Hardwood floors gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. The furniture was simple but expensive. A gray sectional sofa, a glass coffee table, and a dining table that could seat 6. The kitchen had granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that looked like they'd never been used. Mara said faintly that this couldn't be right, that it was too much. One of the security men, Dmitri, who had the build of someone who could break her in half without trying, said that Mr. Volkov's instructions were clear. She was to have a safe, comfortable home. The other man, Victor, interrupted, adding that the building was secure with cameras, keycard access, and a guard station. She would be safe here. They gave her a tour. There were 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. The master bedroom had a king-size bed and an ensuite bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in. The second bedroom was empty. Dmitri said it was waiting for the baby, seeing where she was looking. He added that Mr. Volkov said she should furnish it however she liked and sent him the receipts. Mara wanted to laugh or cry. She wasn't sure which. This was more than she'd ever dreamed of, more than she deserved. Victor added that there was food in the refrigerator and pantry. If she needed anything else, there was a list of approved numbers on the for delivery services, doctors, and groceries. All of it had been arranged. They left her alone after that, though she knew they wouldn't go far. Adrian had said she'd have protection, and apparently he meant it. Mara made her way slowly to the windows, leaning on the crutches the hospital had provided. The river spread out below her like a silver ribbon. Across it, the city sparkled in the afternoon light. Somewhere out there was her old life, the studio apartment with the broken heater, the diner with its grease-stained floors, and the bus stop where she'd waited in the rain. That life was gone now. She'd stepped through the looking glass into something else entirely, something dangerous and beautiful and terrifying. Her phone buzzed. It was a new, unsaved number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her thumb the accept button. It was Adrian's crisp, business-like voice. He said Dmitri had informed him she'd arrived, and asked if everything was satisfactory. Mara answered honestly that it was too much. This apartment. She didn't know how to accept it. He told her she already did when she agreed to his help. She said she thought he meant a studio, maybe a 1-bedroom, not this. He explained that she was under his protection now, which meant she lived somewhere secure, somewhere worthy of that protection. After a pause, he asked if she liked it. Mara looked around at the beautiful space, the river view, the promise of safety. She admitted quietly that she liked it. He said, "Good." Her first shift at the gallery was on Monday, and someone would pick her up at 9. He told her to get some rest, as she'd had a difficult few weeks. He hung up before she could respond. Mara stood there for a long moment, phone in hand, trying to process everything that had happened. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a waitress living paycheck to paycheck. Now she was pregnant, living in luxury, and under the protection of a Russian mob boss who was hunting the father of her child. Her life had become a crime novel, and she had no idea how the story would end. The weekend passed in a strange haze. Mara spent most of it resting and healing, trying to make the apartment feel like home rather than a beautiful cage. She hung the few photos she had. Her parents who'd died in a house fire when she was 19, and her best friend from high school who'd moved to California, and gradually stopped calling. She stalked the empty nursery with nothing but hopes and fears. She tried not to think about Marcus, about what Adrian would do when he finally caught up to him. She tried not to think about the baby growing inside her, this innocent life caught in the crossfire of a crime she'd known nothing about. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and a cold wind. At exactly 9 a.m., there was a knock on her door. Dmitri stood in the hallway, looking uncomfortable in a suit that couldn't quite hide his shoulders. He asked if she was ready. The gallery was a 20-minute drive through morning traffic. It occupied the ground floor of another expensive building, all clean lines and white walls. The art on display was the kind Mara had only ever seen in magazines. Abstract canvases that probably cost more than she used to make in a year, and sculptures that looked like frozen moments of chaos. A woman was waiting inside. She was in her 50s, elegant in a way that suggested old money, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob. She extended a hand when Mara entered, introducing herself as Elena Rotova, the manager of the gallery for Mr. Volkov. Her accent was Russian, but softer than Adrian's, more cultured. Mara said it was nice to meet her and shook her hand. Elena told her that Adrian said she would be working the front desk and asked if she'd ever worked in a gallery before. Mara replied that she was a waitress. Elena's smile was kind. She said they would teach her, that it wasn't complicated. She would greet customers, answer basic questions, and call her if anyone wanted to actually purchase something. She added that most of their clients were by appointment, so it wouldn't be overwhelming. She wasn't wrong. The job was almost shockingly easy compared to the diner. Mara sat at a sleek desk near the entrance, answered calls, and made coffee for the occasional client who wandered in. Elena was patient, teaching her about the artists whose work they displayed, the prices they commanded, and the careful dance of selling art to people who had more money than sense. It was quiet, clean, safe, and Mara hated how much she loved it. At the end of her first week, Elena told her she was doing well, better than she had expected. She mentioned that Adrian's instincts about people are usually good. They were in the back office reviewing inventory. Mara had been learning the computer system, how to track sales and shipments. Mara asked how long she had worked for him, then immediately wondered if that was too personal. But Elena just smiled and said it had been 15 years since he first came to this country. Mara asked what he was like then. Elena poured them both tea from a pot she kept in the office, saying he was younger and angrier. He'd lost everything in Russia. His family, his home. He came here with nothing but rage and determination, and built everything you see from the ground up. Mara accepted the tea, breathing in the steam. She commented that he seemed so controlled now. Elena agreed, but said the rage was still there underneath. It's what drives him. She met Mara's eyes and said that Adrian had told her about her situation, about Marcus, and about the baby. She wanted Mara to know that she was safe here. Whatever happened with Marcus, Adrian wouldn't let it touch her. Mara asked how she could be so sure. Elena's voice was gentle as she explained that she'd seen what happens when Adrian decides to protect someone. He doesn't do it halfway. She told Mara that he's not a good man, and not to mistake his protection for goodness. But he is a man of his word, and when he promises something, he delivers. Mara thought about that as she rode home that evening. She thought about the difference between good men and men who kept their word, and about whether it mattered in the end when you were the one being protected. The apartment was warm when she entered. The heat had already been turned on by some invisible hand. There was food in the refrigerator. Someone had stocked it again while she was at work. Fresh vegetables, good cuts of meat, things she'd never been able to afford before. She made herself dinner and sat by the windows, watching the city lights come on like earthbound stars. Her hand drifted to her stomach, which was still flat, but not for much longer. In a few weeks, she'd start to show. In a few months, there would be a baby, a whole person who would depend on her for everything. The thought was terrifying, but underneath the fear was something else, something that felt almost like hope. Her phone rang. It was Adrian's number. He asked how her first week was. She said it was good, that Elena had been teaching her a lot. There was something in his voice she couldn't identify as he said that Elena thinks she's a fast learner. He then wanted to let her know that they'd had another Marcus sighting, in Vancouver this time. He was still moving north. Mara's heart clenched. She asked if he was going after him. He replied that his people were, as he had other business to attend to. After a pause, he asked how she was feeling physically. The question surprised her. She said she was better. Her legs still hurt, but physical therapy was helping. She joked that the morning sickness was worse than the broken bones. Honestly, she heard a sound that might have been amusement. He said he'd been told pregnancy can be difficult. She asked if he had children. The silence that followed was so complete she thought the call had dropped. Then, quietly, he said no. He had a family once in Russia. They died in a fire. His wife and daughter. That was a long time ago. Mara's breath caught. She said she was sorry, that she didn't know. Adrian's voice was carefully neutral as he replied, "Why would she?" He didn't speak of it often, but he wanted her to understand that he knows what it means to protect something precious. He knows what it means to fail at that protection, and he wouldn't fail again. The call ended before Mara could respond. She sat there in the darkness, phone in hand, thinking about the man behind the cold eyes and controlled power. A man who'd lost everything and rebuilt himself into something terrifying. A man who'd promised to keep her safe. She touched her stomach again, feeling a flutter that might have been the baby moving, or might have been her imagination. She whispered to the tiny life inside her, "I don't know if he's a good man, but maybe he's the right man for now." Outside, the city glittered with a million lights, each one a life being lived, a story unfolding. And Mara's story, as unlikely and dangerous as it was, had only just begun. 3 months slipped by like water through fingers. Spring gave way to early summer, and Mara's body began to change in ways that made the pregnancy impossible to hide. Her stomach rounded, pressing against the elegant clothes Elena helped her choose, flowing blouses and empire waist dresses that managed to look professional while accommodating her growing shape. The gallery became her sanctuary. She learned to recognize the serious collectors from the tourists. She mastered the delicate art of discussing six-figure price tags without flinching, and discovered she had an eye for composition that Elena praised lavishly. The work was fulfilling in ways waitressing had never been, engaging her mind instead of just exhausting her body. But the shadow of Marcus hung over everything. Adrian's updates came regularly. Sightings in Portland, then back to Seattle, then radio silence for 2 weeks that left everyone on edge. Marcus was smart, careful, always one step ahead of the men hunting him, and the longer he stayed free, the more dangerous the situation became. One evening in late June, Adrian said that Marcus was getting desperate, and that desperate men make mistakes. He'd started visiting the apartment once a week, supposedly to check on her welfare. But Mara suspected it was really because he was a man who needed to see his investments personally. They sat in her living room. Mara was curled on the sofa with tea, while Adrian occupied the armchair like a throne. He'd loosened his tie, the first time she'd ever seen him even slightly disheveled, and the sight was oddly humanizing. Mara asked if he thought Marcus knew about the baby. The question had haunted her for months. Adrian's voice was cold. He said that if he did, he hadn't tried to contact her. That suggested either he didn't know or he didn't care. They figured it was the latter. Mara touched her stomach, feeling the flutter of movement that had become constant over the past few weeks. She mentioned the baby kicks now, all the time, especially at night. Something flickered across Adrian's face, too quick to name, gone before she could identify it. She added that the doctor says everything is progressing normally. Apparently, she was disgustingly healthy for someone who was in a car crash 4 months ago. She smiled, saying wryly, his money bought excellent medical care. Adrian leaned forward slightly, telling her it wasn't about the money. He asked if she understood that, if she knew this wasn't a transaction. She asked what it was then. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those gray eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed walls. He called it responsibility. When his driver hit her car, her life became tangled with his. The pregnancy complicated that tangle, and Marcus's theft made it dangerous. But underneath all of that, he said, was a simple truth. She needed help, and he had the power to provide it. That was enough. She pointed out that most people wouldn't see it that way. He replied that he wasn't most people. No. Mara thought he definitely wasn't. Most people didn't command small armies of loyal men. Most people didn't hunt thieves across state lines with the patient determination of a wolf tracking wounded prey. Most people didn't sit in her apartment, discussing fetal development, with the same careful attention they probably gave to business deals worth millions. Changing the subject before the weight of his intensity became too much, she said she'd been thinking about names. If it was a girl, which the ultrasound suggested, maybe something classic, like Elizabeth or Charlotte. Adrian stood, smoothing his tie back into place, saying they were both good names. He said he should go, that he had a meeting in an hour, at 9 p.m. His smile was sharp as he explained his business didn't keep traditional hours. Of course, it didn't. Mara walked him to the door, moving more slowly than she would have liked. Her legs still bothered her sometimes, especially when she'd been on her feet all day at the gallery. Adrian noticed. He noticed everything. He commented that she was limping. She said she was just tired, that it was fine. He told her there were chairs at the gallery and that she should use them. Mara couldn't keep the sarcasm from her voice as she replied, "Yes, sir." Adrian's eyes glinted with something that might have been amusement. He observed that she wasn't afraid of him anymore. It wasn't a question, but Mara answered anyway. She said she was terrified of him, but she was tired of showing it. He said, "Good." He opened the door, pausing on the threshold. He explained that fear without respect is useless, but respect tempered with courage, that's worth something. He left her with those words, disappearing into the elevator with Dmitri at his shoulder, and Mara stood in her doorway, one hand on her growing belly, wondering when exactly the most dangerous man she'd ever met had started feeling like the safest person in her world. The next few weeks passed in relative peace. Mara's pregnancy progressed into the 3rd trimester. It brought with it the special joys of swollen ankles, constant bathroom trips, and a baby who seemed determined to practice kickboxing against her ribs. Elena fussed over her like a worried mother, insisting she take breaks, elevate her feet, and eat more protein. One afternoon, Elena forced Mara into a chair with a cup of bone broth she'd brought from home. She told her she was carrying precious cargo and needed to take care of herself. Mara protested that she was fine, but she drank the broth anyway. It was delicious, rich with herbs she couldn't identify. Elena pointed out that she was 7 months pregnant and working full-time, which wasn't fine. It was stubborn. Elena settled into the chair across from her, studying Mara with those sharp eyes. She asked if Adrian had told her what would happen when he caught Marcus. The question landed like a stone in still water. Mara replied that no, she didn't ask. Elena suggested that maybe she should. Mara set down the broth, her appetite suddenly gone. She said she didn't want to know. Marcus was the father of her baby, but he wasn't part of her life anymore. Maybe he never really was. Elena's blunt statement made Mara's head snap up. She said Adrian wouldn't kill him. Mara was confused. Elena explained that she knew her employer. She knew how he operated. Marcus killed 2 of Adrian's men, which demands a blood payment in their world. But Adrian wouldn't kill him. Not because of mercy, but because of her. Because of the baby. Mara said she never asked him to do that. Elena's voice was gentle. She said Mara didn't have to, that Adrian makes his own rules. But she should know that his restraint would cost him. Other men in his position would see it as weakness, and some would try to exploit that. Mara pressed both hands to her stomach, feeling the baby shift and settle. She said she didn't want any of this. Elena replied that she knew, but wanting and having are different things. Life gives us what it gives us, and all we can do is decide how to carry it. That night, Mara lay awake long past midnight, Elena's words echoing in her mind. The baby kicked steadily against her ribs, a reminder of the innocent life, caught in the middle of adult choices and consequences. She thought about Marcus, about the man she'd believed him to be, versus the reality Adrian had revealed. She thought about Adrian himself, cold and controlled on the surface, but with currents of old pain and fierce protection running underneath. She thought about the future, about raising a child in the shadow of violence and power, about whether love could bloom in such dangerous soil. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It read, "Mara, it's Marcus. I need to see you, please. It's important." Her heart stopped, then started again, hammering so hard she felt sick. Marcus. After 4 months of silence, he was reaching out now. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She should call Adrian immediately. That was the deal. If Marcus contacted her, she told Adrian. But something made her hesitate. She texted back, asking how he got this number. The response came within seconds. He said he had his ways, and asked if they could meet tomorrow at the coffee shop on Market Street. The one with the blue awning, at 2 p.m., he pleaded, saying he could explain everything. She stared at the messages, her mind racing. She realized this was a test of her loyalty, her judgment, her ability to make the right choice when everything was on the line. She could meet Marcus and hear what he had to say. Maybe he deserved that much, a chance to explain himself. He was the father of her baby, after all. Didn't that count for something? But he was also a thief and a murderer, a man who'd lied to her, used her, and disappeared when things got complicated. A man Adrian had been hunting for months with the kind of focused intensity that suggested the debt would be paid in blood. Mara's hands shook as she typed her response. "I'll be there." Then, before she could second-guess herself, she opened a new message and typed Adrian's number. "Marcus contacted me. Wants to meet tomorrow at 2 p.m. Market Street coffee shop. Blue awning." I said yes. The reply came so fast she knew Adrian had been awake, probably working despite the late hour. "Good. I'll handle it. Don't go to the meeting." She replied that she had to. If she didn't show, he'd run again. There was a longer pause this time. Then he replied that if she went, she would put herself and the baby at risk. Marcus was dangerous. Mara typed back, "So are you. But I trust you to keep me safe." The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't respond. Then her phone rang. Adrian's voice was tight with controlled anger when she answered. He said this was a mistake. She replied that maybe it was, but it was hers to make. He told her she didn't understand what she was dealing with. Marcus wasn't the man she knew. He was desperate and cornered, which made him unpredictable. The words were out before Mara could stop them. She said, "Then come with me. Hide in the coffee shop. Bring your people, whatever you need to do. But let me talk to him. Let me hear what he has to say. The single word was sharp as a blade. Why? Why do you need to hear his lies? Mara's voice broke slightly. Because he's the father of my child. Because I need to look him in the eye and know for certain that everything you told me is true. I need closure, Adrian. I can't move forward without it. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush her. Then, quietly, he asked if she was asking him to use her as bait. She said she was offering. Adrian's voice was flat. No, absolutely not. I won't risk you or the baby for the chance to catch Marcus. She argued that he wouldn't be risking them if he was there, if his people were there. She'd be safer in that coffee shop with him watching than she was anywhere else in this city. Mara took a shaky breath. Please, Adrian, I need this. She could hear him breathing, could almost feel the calculation happening on the other end of the line. Adrian wasn't a man who acted on impulse. Every move was measured, considered, planned 3 steps ahead. He finally said that if he agreed, she would follow his instructions exactly. No improvising, no heroics. She would sit, talk, and leave when he told her to leave. He asked if she understood. She said yes. He added that if anything felt wrong, anything at all, she was to walk away immediately. She promised she would. After another pause, he said he'd have the coffee shop secured by noon tomorrow. Dmitri and Victor would be inside, armed. He'd be across the street with a clear line of sight. He told her to wear the pendant he was about to have delivered to her. It had a tracking device and a microphone, so they would hear everything. She agreed. Adrian's voice softened fractionally. He told her that if this went wrong, she interrupted, saying it wouldn't. He wouldn't let it. The conviction in her own voice surprised her, but it was true. Somewhere over the past 4 months, her terror of Adrian Volkov had transformed into something else. Not trust, exactly. You couldn't fully trust a man like him. But faith, maybe. Faith that when he made a promise, he kept it. Adrian told her to get some sleep, that tomorrow would be difficult. He hung up before she could respond. 20 minutes later, there was a knock on her door. One of Adrian's men, someone she'd seen before but didn't know his name, handed her a small jewelry box without a word. Inside was a delicate silver pendant on a chain, simple and beautiful. She fastened it around her neck, feeling the slight weight settle against her collarbone. Somewhere in that pretty piece of jewelry was technology she couldn't even imagine. Eyes and ears that would keep her connected to Adrian even when he was out of sight. She lay back down, one hand on the pendant, the other on her stomach, where the baby had finally settled into sleep. Tomorrow she would face Marcus. Tomorrow she would get her answers. Tomorrow, one way or another, the past would finally catch up with the present. The coffee shop was exactly as Marcus had described. It was tucked into a quiet corner of Market Street with a blue awning and small tables visible through the front windows. Mara arrived at 1:45 p.m., early enough to settle herself, but late enough that Adrian's people would already be in position. She didn't look for them. Adrian had been clear, act natural, pretend she was alone. Dmitri and Victor would be inside somewhere, blending in. Adrian would be watching from across the street, probably from one of the office buildings with their tinted windows and anonymous facades. The pendant felt warm against her skin. It was a reminder that she wasn't really alone, that somewhere Adrian was listening to every word. She ordered tea, decaf, for the baby, and claimed a table near the window. Her hands shook slightly as she wrapped them around the warm cup, and she had to consciously slow her breathing. This was Marcus, the man who'd held her, kissed her, and made promises he'd never intended to keep. The man whose child moved inside her even now. At exactly 2 p.m., he walked through the door. Mara's breath caught. Marcus looked terrible. The handsome, confident man she remembered had been replaced by someone gaunt and hollow-eyed. He had a scruff of beard and clothes that hung loose on his frame. He'd lost weight, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He saw her, and something crumbled in his expression. Relief, maybe, or grief. He crossed to her table in 3 quick strides, reaching for her hands. He thanked her for coming, saying he wasn't sure she would. She pulled her hands back, folding them protectively over her stomach. She told him he had 10 minutes, and to talk. He flinched at her tone, but sat down across from her, his eyes dropping to her rounded belly. He observed that she was pregnant. She told him she was 8 months along, and that it was his. All the color drained from his face. He was shocked. She explained she was 8 weeks along when his employer's driver hit her car, and that she didn't know until she woke up in the hospital. She kept her voice level, watching him carefully. So, yes, Marcus, you're going to be a father. Surprise. He stammered that he didn't, that he never meant to. He ran both hands through his hair, looking genuinely shattered. Mara, I'm so sorry about everything. About leaving you? About the baby? About the danger I put you in? Mara leaned forward. You put me in danger? Or did Adrian Volkov put me in danger when he decided to hunt you down for stealing from him? Marcus's expression hardened. He told you about that? She said he told her that he stole $12 million, that he killed 2 of his men, and that he disappeared like a coward and left her to deal with the consequences. Her voice rose slightly despite her efforts to stay calm. Were any of those things lies, Marcus? He replied that it was more complicated than that. She told him to explain it to her, to make her understand. Marcus glanced around the coffee shop, and Mara wondered if he was looking for threats or just gathering his courage. When he spoke, his voice was low and urgent. He called Adrian Volkov a monster, saying Mara didn't know what he was capable of, the things he'd seen him do, the people he'd watched him destroy. Mara interrupted, saying he'd been nothing but kind to her. He paid her medical bills, gave her an apartment, a job, and made sure she had everything she needed for the baby. Marcus clenched his fists on the table. He said it was because she was leverage. Don't you see? He's using you to get to me. The second he doesn't need you anymore. She asked why he hadn't hurt her yet. She'd been under his protection for 4 months. He's had plenty of opportunities to use her as bait or leverage or whatever he thought she was. Instead, he'd kept her safe. Marcus called it a gilded cage. He reached across the table again, and this time, Mara didn't pull away fast enough. He caught her hand, gripping it tightly. He urged her to come with him right now. He had money hidden, enough to start over somewhere far from here. They could disappear and raise their baby somewhere. Adrian would never find them. Mara looked down at his hand on hers. Once, that touch had made her feel safe. Now it just felt desperate. She reminded him that he killed people. He insisted they would have killed him first, that he didn't have a choice. Mara pulled her hand free, saying there was always a choice. He chose to steal from Adrian. He chose to run. He chose to leave her behind without a word. And now he was choosing to ask her to run with him. To spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, raising their daughter in fear. Marcus's voice cracked. It's a girl? We're having a daughter? The joy in his face was so genuine it hurt to see. For just a moment, Mara glimpsed the man she'd thought she knew. The one who'd made her laugh, who'd listened to her dreams, who'd seemed to actually care about her. But that man had been a lie, or at best a fragment of truth wrapped in deception. She said quietly, Yes, a girl. He pleaded with her to come with him. Please, Mara. I know I don't deserve it. I know I've done terrible things, but she's my daughter. Let me protect her. Let me protect both of you. She told him he couldn't protect them from Adrian Volkov, that nobody could. He replied, I can try. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loud against the floor. I made mistakes, I know that. But I'm still the father of your child. That has to count for something. There was movement in her peripheral vision. Dmitri stood up from a table near the back. Victor was by the counter, his hand inside his jacket where she knew a gun waited. Outside, she caught a glimpse of a familiar figure crossing the street with deadly purpose. Adrian was coming. Mara urged Marcus to leave. Right now, Marcus, run. His eyes widened as he followed her gaze, seeing what she saw. You set me up, you told him. She explained. She told him that he had contacted her, that it was the deal. Mara stood awkwardly, her pregnant belly making quick movements impossible. She said she needed to see him, to hear his side, but she never planned to leave with him. This is your chance, Marcus. Your one chance. Run now, or Adrian will take you. Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. Please, Mara, if you ever felt anything for me. Adrian's voice cut through the coffee shop like a blade. Let her go. He stood in the doorway, perfectly still, but radiating the kind of controlled violence that made everyone else in the room freeze. Marcus's grip on Mara's arm tightened. He said she was coming with him. Adrian took one step forward, just one, but it felt like the temperature dropped 10 degrees. No, she's not. You're going to release her, walk outside, and get in the car that's waiting. We're going to have a conversation, you and I, and if you're very lucky, you'll survive it. Marcus said, You'll kill me eventually, yes, but not today. Adrian's eyes flickered to Mara, and something in his expression softened microscopically. He gave his word that if Marcus released her now, unharmed, his death would be quick when it came. If he continued holding her, he'd make it last for weeks. The promise in those words was absolute. Marcus must have heard it too, because his hand dropped from Mara's arm like she'd burned him. He said he loved her, and there were actual tears in his eyes. I know you won't believe that, but it's true. I loved her. Adrian said that if that were true, he should have stayed. He moved between them, physically blocking Marcus from Mara. He ordered Victor to escort Mr. Chen to the car. It happened so fast, Mara barely registered the movement. Victor was suddenly there, gripping Marcus's arm with a hold that looked gentle but was clearly anything but. Marcus didn't resist as he was led toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back one last time. I'm sorry, Mara, for everything. Take care of our daughter. Tell her I tried. Then he was gone, bundled into a black SUV that pulled away from the curb with quiet efficiency. And Mara was left standing in the coffee shop, trembling, with Adrian watching her with those fathomless gray eyes. His voice was careful and controlled as he asked if she was hurt. She said no, that he wasn't trying to hurt her. Adrian's jaw was tight. He was trying to take you. That's the same thing. You should go home. Dimitri will drive you. She caught his arm before he could turn away, asking what he was going to do to him. The contact shocked them both. She had never touched him voluntarily before. His muscles were like steel under the expensive fabric of his suit. He replied, "What needs to be done?" She reminded him he promised he wouldn't kill him today. He said he would keep that promise. But Marcus had information he needed. Names of people who helped him, places he'd hidden money. He would give him all of it. And then, Adrian's expression was unreadable. Then we'll see. She said, he's the father of my baby. Something flickered in Adrian's eyes. Pain maybe, or understanding. I know, that's why he'll die quickly instead of slowly. That's the only mercy I can offer. Mara's hand dropped. She wanted to argue, to plead for Marcus's life, but what could she say? Marcus had killed people, stolen money, and made choices that had consequences he couldn't escape. And underneath her sympathy for him was something uglier, relief. Because as long as Marcus was alive, he would be a threat, a loose end, a complication in the fragile peace Adrian had built around her. She said quietly that she needed to sit down. Adrian guided her to the nearest chair with surprising gentleness, his hand warm on her elbow. He ordered Dimitri to get her water. The water appeared within seconds. Mara sipped it slowly, trying to calm her racing heart. The baby was moving frantically, responding to her stress, and she pressed a hand to her stomach in silent apology. She whispered that she was sorry. Adrian crouched beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. He asked what for. She said she was sorry for asking to do this, for making him use her as bait. She gestured helplessly at the space where Marcus had stood. All of it. Adrian's voice was surprisingly gentle. You got your closure. That's what you needed. And we got Marcus. That's what I needed. Everyone wins, except Marcus. He said Marcus made his choices, and now he had to live with the consequences. Adrian stood, offering her his hand. Come on, let's get you home. She let him pull her to her feet, let Dimitri guide her to the car. As they pulled away from the coffee shop, Mara looked back one last time at the place where her past and present had collided, where the man who'd fathered her child had been taken by the man who protected her. She didn't know which of them she should mourn for. Maybe both, maybe neither. The ride home was silent. Dimitri didn't try to make conversation, and Mara was grateful. She needed time to process, to understand what had just happened and what it meant for her future. Marcus was caught. Soon he would be dead, and her daughter would grow up never knowing her biological father. Only the stories Mara would tell her, carefully edited and stripped of the worst truths. When they reached her building, Dimitri walked her to her door. He told her Mr. Volkov would call her later to make sure she was all right. She thanked him, and he left her alone. Mara locked the door behind her, moving automatically to the windows. The city spread out below her, vast and indifferent. Somewhere out there, Adrian was interrogating Marcus. Somewhere out there, the final chapter of Marcus Chen's story was being written in pain and blood, and here she stood, safe in her beautiful apartment, carrying the child of a dead man walking. Her phone rang just after midnight. Adrian's voice was tired when she answered. He said it was done. Mara closed her eyes. She asked if he was alive. He replied, "For now. He told me everything I needed to know." After a pause, he added, "He asked me to give you a message." She asked what the message was. He said to name her Charlotte Fullett, that she'd mentioned it once and it was his mother's name. Adrian's voice was careful. He said Marcus knew he didn't deserve to ask, but he was asking anyway. Tears burned in Mara's eyes. Charlotte. The name she'd mentioned in passing months ago, when she and Marcus were still just two people falling in love, before everything went wrong. She whispered. Okay, Charlotte. Adrian told her to get some rest, that tomorrow they would talk about what comes next. He hung up, and Mara stood alone in the darkness, both hands on her belly where she was Charlotte now, officially, kicked and turned. She whispered to her daughter, Your father loved you. Whatever else he was, whatever he did, he loved you. I'll make sure you know that. But she wouldn't tell Charlotte about the theft, the murders, or the desperate flight that had ended in an anonymous black SUV. She wouldn't tell her about Adrian's cold promise of death, or the way Marcus had looked when Victor dragged him away. She would tell her a better story, a kinder one. The story of a man who made mistakes but tried to make them right, who loved her mother even if he showed it badly, who wanted his daughter to have a beautiful name and a good life. It was the least she could do, the most she could offer. 3 days later, news reached her that Marcus Chen had been found dead in a warehouse on the south side. The report said it was an apparent suicide, a single gunshot to the head with no signs of struggle. Mara knew better. She knew Adrian's fingerprints were all over it, even if they'd never appear in any official report. But the death had been quick, just as promised. Whatever mercy Adrian was capable of, he'd shown it. She didn't go to the funeral. There wasn't one. Marcus had no family in the city, no friends who would claim him. He disappeared from the world as completely as he tried to disappear from Adrian's reach. And Mara, standing at her window with her hand on her stomach, watched the city lights flicker and knew that this chapter was finally, irrevocably closed. Marcus Chen was gone. Charlotte was coming. And Adrian Volkov, the most dangerous man she'd ever met, had somehow become the only person she truly trusted to keep them both safe. The week following Marcus's death brought an unexpected quiet. Mara went through the motions of her life. She worked at the gallery, attended doctor's appointments, and prepared the nursery with soft colors and careful hope. But underneath the routine was a strange hollowness, as if the confrontation with Marcus had drained something vital from her. Adrian noticed. Of course, he noticed. He stated that she wasn't sleeping. It wasn't a question. He'd appeared at her door on a Thursday evening, unannounced as always, carrying takeout from the Thai place she'd mentioned 3 months ago. Mara accepted the food, gesturing him inside, saying she was sleeping fine. This had become their pattern. Adrian visiting once or twice a week, checking on her with the focused attention of a scientist monitoring an important experiment. He pointed out the shadows under her eyes and said Elena had mentioned she'd been distracted at work. Mara replied that Elena needed to mind her own business. Adrian leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and said that Elena cared about her, as did he. He asked her to talk to him. She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. The mob boss playing therapist, as if he had any framework for understanding normal human grief. But when she looked at him, really looked, she saw genuine concern in those gray eyes, something almost like understanding. She admitted quietly that she didn't know what she was supposed to feel about Marcus, about what happened. She should hate him for lying to her, for putting her in danger. But he was gone now, and all she felt was empty. Adrian told her she was allowed to grieve him, even knowing what he did. She asked if he was giving her permission to mourn a man he killed. Adrian's expression didn't change. He said he was giving her permission to be human. Marcus may have been a liar and a thief, but he was also the father of her child. She was allowed to feel complicated things about that. Mara sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. She asked if he suffered at the end. Adrian moved to the chair across from her and said no. It was quick and painless. He spent his last hour writing letters, one for her and one for Charlotte. Her breath caught. She asked where they were. He said they were burned. The letter to her was full of justifications and excuses, nothing she needed to hear. Adrian's voice gentled. But the letter to Charlotte, he read it first to make sure it was safe. It was actually beautiful. He talked about his own childhood, his mother, his dreams for his daughter. No mention of his crimes, just love. She asked why he burned it anyway. He replied that he memorized it first, every word. Adrian leaned forward. When Charlotte is old enough to ask about her father, he would tell her what he wrote. The good parts, the true parts. The love he felt for her even though he never got to meet her. Tears spilled down Mara's cheeks before she could stop them. She asked why he would do that. He said it was because she deserved to know her father loved her, and because Mara deserved not to carry that knowledge alone. Adrian pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, actual cloth, monogrammed, ridiculously old-fashioned, and handed it to her. He told her she wasn't alone in this, that she never had been. She dabbed at her eyes, struggling to compose herself. She said she didn't understand him. He killed people, he ran criminal enterprises, but he memorized letters for a dead man's daughter. It didn't make sense. Adrian stood, moving to the window where he could watch the city lights. He said life rarely does. He reminded her that he'd once told her he lost his family in Russia, his wife and daughter. They died in a fire set by men who wanted to hurt him. He wasn't there to protect them. Mara had known this, but hearing him speak of it directly was different. His voice carried old pain, carefully controlled, but still present. Adrian continued, saying that after they died, he came here with nothing but rage. He built everything she saw through violence and fear, becoming exactly the kind of man he'd hated back home. He turned to face her, but somewhere in all of that, he forgot why he started. He forgot that the reason he wanted power in the first place was to protect the people he loved. And now, he said, now he remembered. She and Charlotte reminded him. His smile was sad. He told her they reminded him that power is worthless if it can't shelter the innocent. That sometimes the best thing a dangerous man can do is stand between the world and someone who needs protecting. Adrian broke the moment before it could become too heavy, telling her to eat her dinner, that it was getting cold. They ate in companionable silence, and afterward, Adrian surprised her by helping clean up. This powerful, dangerous man washing dishes in her kitchen, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Mara found herself watching him, noticing details she'd overlooked before. The way his sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked with old scars. The careful precision of his movements. The slight softening of his features when he thought she wasn't looking. She realized with a start that he was handsome. Not in Marcus's easy, charming way, but in a deeper, harder way, like a statue carved from marble, all sharp edges and cold beauty, but with hints of warmth buried deep beneath the surface. Adrian caught her staring and asked what was wrong. She said nothing, just thank you for the food, for the conversation, for everything. He dried his hands, studying her with that unsettling intensity. He told her she didn't need to thank him. She said she did, though. He'd given her so much. He replied that he'd given her what she needed to survive. That wasn't generosity, it was basic human decency. She argued that in his world it was more than that. Adrian was quiet for a moment, then softly said that maybe it was, but she wasn't part of his world. Not really. She was separate from it, better than it. She replied that she was pregnant with a dead thief's baby and living in an apartment paid for by a crime boss. She was absolutely part of his world now. Adrian moved closer, and Mara's breath caught at the sudden proximity. He said no. She was under his protection, and that was different. His world was violence and power and constant calculation. She was something else, something clean. The way he said it, like she was sacred and untouchable, made her chest tight. She told him she wasn't clean, she was just ordinary. Adrian reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek with surprising gentleness. He told her there was nothing ordinary about her. She was strong and brave and stubborn. She'd survived things that would have broken most people. That wasn't ordinary, it was extraordinary. His hand was warm against her skin. Mara found herself leaning into the touch, craving the comfort and connection she'd been denying herself for months. When was the last time someone had touched her with tenderness instead of clinical professionalism? When was the last time she'd let herself want that kind of touch? She whispered his name, not sure what she was asking for. He seemed to understand anyway. His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone, his eyes searching her face like he was memorizing every detail. He told her to tell him to leave. She said she didn't want him to leave. Then he told her to tell him to stop. She replied that she didn't want that either. The air between them felt electric. Adrian's other hand came up to cup her face, holding her like she was made of glass. He told her he wasn't a good man, that he'd done terrible things and would do more terrible things. Being close to him was dangerous. She said she knew, and she didn't care. He said she should care, but repeated that she didn't. Mara's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady under her palms. She told him she should be terrified of him. She should hate him for what he did to Marcus, but all she felt was safe. When he was there, she felt safe. Something cracked in Adrian's carefully controlled expression. He said roughly that she and the baby undid him. They made him want things he thought he'd buried with his family, things he had no right to want. She asked what things. Instead of answering, he kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative like he was afraid she'd break. But when Mara responded, rising on her toes despite her unwieldy belly, his arms came around her with fierce possession. The kiss deepened, months of tension and denial pouring into it, and Mara felt something shift inside her chest, something that felt dangerously close to falling. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. He said this was a mistake. She replied that it probably was. He pointed out that he was twice her age, that he ran a criminal empire, and that he killed her baby's father. She said she knew all of that. Asked if she still wanted this, wanted him. Mara pulled back enough to meet his eyes. She said she didn't know what she wanted. A week ago, she was crying over Marcus. Her hormones were insane, her emotions were everywhere, and she was so pregnant she could barely see her own feet. This might be the worst possible time to start something with anyone, let alone him. But when he was there, she felt less alone. When he looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth protecting, she felt. She struggled to find the words. She felt like maybe she could be someone's choice instead of someone's obligation. Adrian's hands framed her face again, his touch impossibly gentle. He told her she was not an obligation, that she never was. She asked what she was then. He was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes boring into hers. He said she was the first thing he'd cared about in 15 years. She was the reason he woke up thinking about something other than business and revenge. He exhaled roughly. He said she was dangerous to him in ways she couldn't possibly understand. She asked if that was a bad thing. He said he didn't know yet, but he was willing to find out if she was. Mara nodded, not trusting her voice. Adrian pulled her close, carefully, mindful of her belly, and they stood like that for a long moment. She could feel his heartbeat steady and strong. She could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle. She could feel for the first time in months like maybe everything would actually be okay. A sharp kick against her ribs made them both jump. Adrian pulled back, eyes wide, asking if that was Charlotte saying hello. Mara laughed, taking his hand and placing it on her stomach. She said Charlotte had been active all day. Another kick came, stronger this time. Adrian's expression transformed into something Mara had never seen before, pure wonder. He said she was strong. Adrian said quietly, like her mother, then seemed to realize what he'd implied. Mara kept his hand pressed to her belly, saying she knew what he meant. She watched his face as Charlotte performed what felt like an entire gymnastics routine. She told him Charlotte liked him, that she was never this active with the doctors. Adrian's voice was rough with emotion. He said maybe she knew he was there to protect her, both of them. The moment stretched between them, fragile and perfect. Then Adrian's phone buzzed, shattering the peace. He checked it with obvious reluctance. He said he had to go, that there was a situation that needed handling, a dangerous situation. He said they were all dangerous, but this one particularly so. He squeezed her hand and told her to stay inside tonight and keep the doors locked. Dimitri would be in the hallway. Fear spiked through her. She asked what was happening. Adrian's voice went cold. He explained that Marcus's death had created a power vacuum. Some of his rivals thought it showed weakness, that he was going soft because he didn't make an example of him. They were testing boundaries, seeing if they could push. She asked if they could. His smile was sharp as a blade. He said no, that they would learn that tonight. He kissed her once more, quick and hard, then was gone, leaving Mara alone with her racing heart and the baby doing somersaults in her womb. She tried to sleep but couldn't. Every sound in the hallway made her jump. Every car alarm in the distance sounded like gunfire. She knew Adrian was out there somewhere, doing things she couldn't let herself imagine too closely, and the worry gnawed at her. He'd been right. Caring about him was dangerous, but it was too late to stop now. Her phone rang at 3 a.m. Mara grabbed it, heart pounding, terrified it would be someone calling to tell her Adrian was dead. But it was Adrian himself, his voice steady and calm. He said he was outside her building and asked if he could come up. She said of course. 5 minutes later, he was at her door. He looked tired but uninjured, his suit jacket missing and his shirt sleeves still rolled up. There was a spot of blood on his collar that made Mara's stomach clench. She asked if he was hurt. He said no, it wasn't his blood. He moved past her into the apartment, heading straight for her bathroom and asking if he could use it. She followed, watching as he stripped off his shirt and began washing his hands and arms with methodical precision. The scars she'd noticed before were more visible now, a map of old violence written on his skin. The question came out before she could stop it. Did you kill someone tonight? Adrian met her eyes in the mirror. Yes. 3 people who thought they could kidnap one of my accountants to get information. They were wrong. She asked about the accountant. He was safe, shaken but safe. He dried his hands. The message has been sent. No one else will test me for a while. Mara should have been horrified. She should have ordered him out, called the police, done something other than stand there watching him like this was normal. Instead, she heard herself ask if he wanted coffee or something stronger. Adrian turned to face her, surprise flickering across his features. He noted that she wasn't afraid. She said she was terrified, but not of him, never of him. She moved closer. You did what you had to do to protect your people. I understand that. He asked if she really did, because most people don't. Most people haven't lived the life he's lived, haven't needed the kind of protection he provides. Mara touched his bare shoulder, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles. You're not a monster. Adrian, monsters don't memorize letters for dead men's daughters. They don't wash dishes or get excited about baby kicks. They don't look at ordinary waitresses like they're worth protecting. Adrian said again, his voice rough, that she wasn't ordinary. And I'm not here because I had to protect my people tonight. I'm here because after violence and blood, the only thing I wanted was to see you, to make sure you were safe. She told him she was safe, that they both were. He pulled her close, and Mara went willingly, pressing herself against his bare chest and listening to his heartbeat, slowly returned to normal. They stood like that for a long time, drawing comfort from each other in the quiet hours before dawn. Finally, Adrian stirred. He said he should go and let her sleep. The word was out before Mara could second-guess it. Stay, please, just stay. She explained it wasn't for anything improper, just that she didn't want to be alone tonight, and she didn't think he did either. Adrian searched her face, then nodded slowly. He agreed, but said he would sleep on the couch. It was a deal. She gave him a blanket and a pillow, watching him settle onto her sofa, with the careful movements of a man used to sleeping in uncomfortable places. He looked strange there, this powerful, dangerous man folded onto her furniture like a normal person. She wished him good night, and he replied in kind. She went to bed but left her door cracked open, comforted by the knowledge that he was there, that between her and the world was a man who would kill to keep her safe. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like peace. The next morning, Mara woke to the smell of coffee and something sweet. She padded out to the kitchen to find Adrian, dressed again and looking impeccable despite sleeping on a couch, making breakfast. She asked if he cooked. He replied that he had many talents. He slid a plate of French toast toward her and told her to eat, that she needed her strength. The domesticity of it was surreal, but Mara sat and ate, watching Adrian move around her kitchen with easy familiarity. He'd found the good maple syrup she kept hidden, the butter, even the fresh strawberries in the back of the refrigerator. She admitted it was really good. He said his mother taught him before. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They ate in comfortable silence. Then Adrian's phone buzzed. It seemed to never stop. He checked it with a frown, saying there was always more trouble, but he set the phone down. Nothing that couldn't wait an hour. She told him he didn't have to stay, that she knew he was busy. Adrian's eyes met hers across the table. He said he was exactly where he wanted to be. I meant what I said last night, Mara, about you being the first thing I've cared about in 15 years. I'm not good at this, at caring, at being close to someone, but I want to try, if you'll let me. Mara's heart hammered. She asked what exactly he was asking. He asked if she would let him be part of her life. Not as her protector or her employer, but as whatever they could be together. She asked even though she was about to have another man's baby, he said, especially because of that. Charlotte is innocent in all of this. She deserves a father who will love her unconditionally, and you deserve someone who sees you as more than an obligation or a convenience. Adrian reached across the table, taking her hand. I can't promise to be perfect. I can't promise to always make the right choice or say the right thing, but I can promise to protect you both with everything I have, to be there every day in whatever way you need. Tears pricked at Mara's eyes. She said it sounded suspiciously like a proposal. His smile was soft. Not yet, but someday, maybe. First, let's just try dating. Normal dating. Dinner, movies, conversation. Let me court you properly. Mara laughed through her tears. Court me? Who says court anymore? He replied that Russians do, that they're very old-fashioned about some things. Adrian lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. So, what do you say, Mara Caldwell? Will you let me court you? She should have said no. She should have recognized this for the complication it was. She was 8 months pregnant, emotionally fragile, living under the protection of a man who killed people for a living. This was objectively a terrible idea. She heard herself say, "Yes, yes, I will." Adrian's smile transformed his entire face, making him look years younger. Good. Then I'll pick you up Friday at 7. Wear something comfortable. She asked where they were going. He said she would see. He left shortly after, called away by business that Mara didn't ask about, but the apartment felt different now. Warmer, fuller, like his presence had changed the very air. Elena noticed immediately when Mara arrived at the gallery. She told her she was glowing. Mara replied that she was 8 months pregnant, that she was sweating, not glowing. Elena insisted this was different. Her sharp eyes narrowed as she asked what happened. Mara tried to deflect, but Elena was persistent. Finally, she admitted that she and Adrian were trying something, dating, she guessed. Elena's expression cycled through surprise, concern, and finally, understanding. I wondered when he'd finally make a move. He's been in love with you for months. Mara denied it. Elena said, Mara, darling, I've worked for Adrian for 15 years. I know what he looks like when he cares about someone, and the way he looks at you. Elena smiled. That's not protection. That's devotion. The words settled into Mara's chest, warm and terrifying. Devotion from a man who commanded empires and ended lives with a phone call. From a man who'd lost everything once and rebuilt himself into something harder, colder. From a man who looked at her like she was worth protecting. The rest of the week passed in a blur of anticipation and nerves. Friday arrived faster than Mara expected, bringing with it a level of anxiety she hadn't felt since high school. What did one wear on a date with a mob boss, especially when 8 months pregnant? She settled on a soft blue dress that accommodated her belly, paired with comfortable flats and minimal makeup. She was too tired for anything elaborate. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman on the edge of something new and frightening and wonderful. Adrian arrived exactly at 7, looking devastating in dark jeans and a black sweater that somehow made him look both casual and dangerous. His eyes went soft when he saw her. He told her she looked beautiful. She joked that she looked like she swallowed a beach ball. He replied, a beautiful beach ball, and offered his arm. The car, a sleek Mercedes driven by Victor, took them not to a fancy restaurant as Mara had expected, but to a converted warehouse district on the river. Adrian guided her inside a building marked only with a number, up an elevator to the top floor. The doors opened onto a rooftop garden, unlike anything Mara had ever seen. String lights hung between potted trees, creating a canopy of warm light. A table for two sat in the center, already set with elegant simplicity, and beyond it, the city spread out in all directions, a carpet of lights under the deepening sky. Adrian said this was incredible. He explained that he wanted somewhere private, somewhere they could talk without interruption. He pulled out her chair. He mentioned the chef was downstairs and would send up courses when they were ready. They ate slowly, talking about everything and nothing. Adrian asked about her childhood, her parents, her dreams before everything went wrong. Mara found herself sharing things she hadn't told anyone. The books she'd loved, the places she'd wanted to travel, the future she'd imagined before poverty and survival became her only concerns. In return, Adrian shared carefully selected pieces of his past, his childhood in St. Petersburg, his mother's love of music, his father's quiet strength, the wife he'd loved and lost, the daughter who'd been 4 years old when she died, with dark curls and a laugh like bells. Her name was Anna, he said quietly. She would have been 19 now, probably in university, breaking hearts. Mara noted that he still loved them, his wife and daughter. He said always, but loving them didn't mean he couldn't love again. Adrian's eyes met hers. He said he spent 15 years convinced that part of him died with them. He thought that he'd never want to protect anyone, never care about anyone, never let himself be vulnerable again, and then he walked into her hospital room and saw her broken and brave and pregnant. And something shifted. She asked what shifted. He said he remembered that life continues. That new love doesn't erase old love, it just makes room beside it. He reached across the table, taking her hand. He told her she made him want to be the man he was before everything went wrong, the man who cared about more than power and revenge. Mara squeezed his hand, her throat tight with emotion. She said she wasn't sure she was worth all that. He told her to let him be the judge of that. They finished dinner as the sky turned from blue to black, the city lights growing brighter around them. Adrian told her about the legitimate businesses he was building, art galleries like the one where she worked, import companies, real estate. His plan was to slowly transition away from the criminal enterprises that had built his empire. He admitted it wouldn't happen overnight. He had obligations, deceit, and alliances that couldn't be broken easily. But in 5 years, maybe 10, he could be legitimate, clean. She asked why, since he had power now, money, and respect. He replied that he also had enemies and constant danger. A life where he couldn't sleep without worrying someone would put a bullet in him. Adrian's voice was fierce. He said he wanted better than that. For himself, for her, for Charlotte. The casual way he included Charlotte in his future plans made Mara's heart skip. She pointed out that Charlotte wasn't his daughter. He replied, not biologically. But if she would let him, he'd like to be her father in every way that matters. To raise her, protect her, and love her as his own. Adrian stood, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair. He said he knew it was too soon, that they were just starting this, but he needed her to know his intentions. He wasn't playing games. He wasn't trying to control her or own her. He just wanted the chance to build something real with her. A family, a future, a life where Charlotte grows up safe and loved, and never has to know the violence that created her circumstances. Mara touched his face, feeling the rough stubble of his jaw. She asked if he really meant that. He said every word. She leaned down, awkward with her belly, and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, both smiling, Adrian rested his hand on her stomach. Charlotte kicked immediately, as if in approval. Mara whispered that she liked him. He replied that the feeling was mutual. Adrian pressed a kiss to Mara's belly, then to her forehead. Come on, let me take you home before you fall asleep in your chair. The drive back was quiet and comfortable. Adrian walked her to her door, kissed her good night with restrained passion, and left her floating on a cloud of hope and possibility. But peace, Mara was learning, never lasted long in Adrian's world. 3 days later, everything shattered. She was at the gallery when Dmitri appeared. His face grim, he told her they needed to leave now. She asked what was wrong. He said there was no time to explain, that it was Mr. Volkov's orders. She was going somewhere safe until the situation was resolved. Elena appeared from the back office, her expression tight. She told Mara to go with him and not to argue. The fear in Elena's voice killed any protest. Mara grabbed her purse and followed Dmitri to the waiting car. Victor was already there, tense and alert. As the car pulled into traffic faster than was safe, Mara demanded to know what was happening. Dmitri said grimly that it was war. The Kozlov family thought Mr. Volkov's protection of her and his handling of Marcus showed weakness. They declared their intention to take his territory, and to make their point, they'd put a price on her head. The words hit like physical blows. She asked if it was on her. He confirmed it was on her and the baby. They thought killing her would destroy Mr. Volkov's credibility. Victor's hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, he said. They didn't know him like they did. This wouldn't break him. It would unleash him. Mara pressed both hands to her stomach, feeling Charlotte's movements. She asked where they were taking her. Dmitri explained. It was Mr. Volkov's safe house in the mountains, 3 hours away. It was completely secure and off any grid. She would stay there until this was over. And Adrian? Dmitri's smile was cold. He said Mr. Volkov was handling it personally. The Kozlovs made a mistake, and they would learn that tonight. The drive took 4 hours through winding mountain roads. The safe house turned out to be a fortress, disguised as a luxury cabin. It was all stone and timber and glass, perched on a mountainside with views that would have been breathtaking if Mara hadn't been terrified. Inside, Adrian was waiting. He pulled her into his arms the moment she entered, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. He said, thank heaven she was safe. She asked what was happening. He replied that Dmitri said the Kozlovs had overplayed their hand. They thought threatening her would make him weak. Instead, they'd given him justification to end them completely. Adrian pulled back, his eyes burning with cold fury. He told her he was going to war, and when it was over, she would never be threatened again. He promised her that. Mara touched his face. seeing the transformation from the man who'd courted her so gently to the one who'd built an empire on fear. She told him not to get himself killed. He said he wouldn't, that he had too much to live for now. He kissed her fiercely. He told her to stay here and not leave for any reason. There were guards, supplies, everything she needed. He'd be back as soon as it was safe. She asked how long. He said a few days, maybe a week. His hand covered her belly. He told her to keep Charlotte safe. That was all he asked. Then he was gone, disappearing into the night with Victor and half a dozen other men. And Mara was left in the beautiful prison, waiting for a war to end and praying the man she loved would survive it. The first night in the safe house stretched endlessly. Mara paced the main room, her hands never leaving her belly, jumping at every sound the wind made against the windows. The 4 guards Adrian had left, silent and professional, rotated shifts with military precision. But their presence did nothing to ease the gnawing fear in her chest. She tried calling Adrian 3 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. She whispered to the phone to pick up, as if her need could will him to answer, just to let her know he was alive. But the phone stayed silent, and the night crept by with agonizing slowness. Dawn brought Dmitri, appearing at her door with dark circles under his eyes and tension radiating from every muscle. He said quickly that Adrian was alive and unharmed, clearly used to that being the first question, but he said it was worse than they thought. The Kozlovs had allied with 2 other families. They were calling it a coalition against Mr. Volkov's tyranny. His tone made it clear what he thought of that justification. Mara sank into the nearest chair. She asked how many people they were talking about. Dmitri's jaw tightened. He estimated maybe 60 armed men between the 3 families, plus their business operations and their connections. They were trying to strangle Mr. Volkov's income streams while attacking his people directly. 3 warehouses had been burned last night, and 2 of their clubs were shot up. 5 men were in the hospital, and 1 was dead. She asked who died. He said it was Alex, who sometimes worked security at the gallery. She might have met him. Mara had met him. He was a young man, maybe 25, who'd always smiled and held doors for her. Now he was dead because people wanted to hurt Adrian by hurting everyone around him. She whispered that it was her fault, if Adrian hadn't protected her. Dmitri's voice was firm. He told her this was always coming. The Kozlovs had won in Mr. Volkov's territory for years. She was just the excuse they were using. If it wasn't her, it would have been something else. She said that didn't make her feel better. He replied that it should, because it meant Mr. Volkov wasn't fighting for pride or territory. He was fighting for her, for Charlotte, and when he fights for something he loves. Dmitri's smile was cold. The outcome is never in doubt. He left after that, returning to the city and the war being waged there. And Mara was alone again, trapped in luxury while people died over her. The second day was worse. Elena called in the afternoon, her voice shaking. She was so worried. Mara assured her she was safe, and Dmitri had said Elena was in a secure location too. Elena confirmed that Mr. Volkov had moved all the civilian employees somewhere safe to a hotel under guard. After a pause, she asked if Mara had heard from him. Mara said no, and asked if Elena had. Elena said she'd gotten a text that morning, just 2 words, "Stay safe." That was all. Her breath hitched. She said this was bad, that she'd been with Adrian for 15 years. She'd seen him through territorial disputes and power plays, but she'd never seen anything like this. The coalition wasn't just trying to take his business, they were trying to erase him. Mara said they wouldn't succeed. Elena replied that she hoped she was right, but even if Adrian won, the cost. Elena didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. After they hung up, Mara stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching clouds roll across the mountain peaks. Charlotte kicked steadily, as if reminding her that life continued even when the world outside was burning. Mara told her belly that her father was out there, fighting for them. Not the father who made her, but the father who was choosing her. The one who was risking everything to keep them safe. The baby kicked harder, and Mara let herself believe it was understanding, agreement, hope. Night fell again. Mara tried to sleep but couldn't. Every creak of the house made her imagine attackers. Every gust of wind sounded like gunfire. She lay in the massive bed, larger than anything she'd ever slept in before, and stared at the ceiling, willing her phone to ring. At 2 a.m., it finally did. It was Adrian. She grabbed it so fast, she nearly dropped it. His voice was rough with exhaustion. He apologized for not calling sooner, saying things had been complicated. She asked if he was hurt. He said he had minor injuries, nothing serious. After a pause, he asked how she and Charlotte were. She said they were fine, just worried and scared. Mara pressed the phone harder against her ear as if that could bring him closer. She mentioned Dmitri had told her about Alex. Adrian's voice went hard. He said he knew, and he was sorry she had to hear that. But his death wouldn't be in vain. The Kozlovs would pay for every drop of blood they've spilled. She asked how long this was going to last. He said he didn't know. They were dug in and well-funded, but they made a critical mistake. They thought he was fighting to protect his territory and pride. They didn't understand that he was fighting for something much more important. His voice softened. He was fighting for her, for Charlotte, for the future they were going to build together. That made him more dangerous than they could possibly imagine. Mara's throat tightened. She pleaded with him not to die for them. He said he didn't plan to die at all. He planned to win decisively and then come back to her. There was a sound in the background, maybe shouting. He said he had to go, that Victor needed him, but he needed to hear her voice to know she was really okay. She promised she was okay and told him to just be careful. He said always. He paused. I love you, Mara. I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. I love you. The words hit her like a physical force. She'd known somewhere deep down, but hearing him say it made it real, undeniable. She whispered back, I love you too. Come back to me, please. He said wild horses couldn't keep him away. The line went dead. Mara clutched the phone to her chest, tears streaming down her face. He loved her. Adrian Volkov, the most dangerous man she'd ever met, loved her. And she loved him back, despite the violence and the danger and the absolute insanity of their situation. The third day brought news that made Mara's blood run cold. One of the guards, a man named Pavle, who sometimes brought her meals, mentioned it casually while delivering lunch. He said they hit the gallery last night and burned it to the ground. The plate slipped from Marin's hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. Elena's gallery? Yes, they wanted to send a message. Pavle started cleaning up the broken ceramic, not meeting her eyes. He said no one was hurt since the building was empty, but the art, the records, were all gone. Mara thought of the beautiful space where she'd found purpose and peace, the paintings and sculptures she'd learned to love. Elena's careful curation, the appointment book filled with wealthy collectors, the quiet dignity of the work, all of it gone. She asked if Mr. Volkov knew. Pavle hesitated. He said yes, and that he wasn't taking it well. The gallery was one of his legitimate businesses, something he was proud of. More than that, Mara thought, it was where he'd given her a new life, where she'd started to believe she could be something more than a struggling waitress. It was destroying a symbol of the future. Adrian was trying to build. She spent the rest of the day in a fog of grief and rage. This was her fault. If she'd never accepted Adrian's help, never let him into her life, none of this would be happening. The gallery would still stand. Alex would still be alive. Adrian wouldn't be risking everything in a war that had her at its center. That night, she barely touched her dinner. The guards exchanged worried looks but didn't comment. What could they say? Their world was burning, and everyone was just trying to survive. She was lying in bed, staring at nothing, when she felt it. A sharp, stabbing pain low in her abdomen that made her gasp. Then another, so stronger, she whispered, No, not now. Please, not now. But Charlotte had her own timeline. Another contraction hit hard enough to make Mara cry out. She fumbled for her phone and called the first number she could find. Dmitri answered on the first ring. He asked if something was wrong. She told him the baby. She was having contractions. It was too early. She was only 36 weeks. His voice was steady, despite the panic underneath. He said he was calling for medical transport now and told her to stay calm and not move. He asked if there was any bleeding. She didn't think so, but it hurt. It really hurt. He assured her the doctor would be there in 20 minutes and that he was informing Mr. Volkov now. She told him not to tell him that he was in the middle of. He interrupted, saying he would want to know. He would demand to know. Dimitri's tone left no room for argument. Hold on, Miss Caldwell. Help is coming. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Mara's life. The contractions came every few minutes, each one worse than the last. Pavla and another guard hovered anxiously in the doorway, clearly out of their depth, with pregnant women and medical emergencies. When the helicopter finally landed on the pad behind the house, Mara could have wept with relief. A doctor and nurse rushed in with professional efficiency, checking her vitals and asking questions in calm voices. The doctor confirmed it was preterm labor, not unusual at 36 weeks, but they needed to get her to a hospital. He asked if she could walk. She thought so. They helped her to the helicopter, with Pavle carrying her overnight bag. As they lifted off, Mara watched the safe house disappear below them, lit up like a beacon against the dark mountains. She asked the doctor where they were going. He replied that they were going to St. Catherine's, on Mr. Volkov's orders. It was where she was before. Yes, the same hospital where she'd woken up 8 months ago to find her life completely changed. Full circle, she thought, dizzily. The flight took 30 minutes. The contractions didn't stop, but they didn't get worse either. They were steady, painful, but manageable. The doctor kept monitoring her, his expression professionally neutral. For the 10th time, she asked if the baby was okay. He said the heartbeat was strong and the position was good. If she delivered tonight, she should be fine. 36 weeks was early, but not dangerously so. They landed on the hospital roof. Another team was waiting, whisking Mara into a wheelchair and down to a private birthing suite that looked more like a luxury hotel room than a medical facility. A nurse, helping Mara into a hospital gown, said that Mr. Volkov had arranged for the best and that she was in excellent hands. But the hands Mara wanted were Adrian's, and he was somewhere in the city fighting a war, completely unreachable. Or so she thought. An hour later, as her contractions intensified to the point where she could barely think straight, the door to her suite slammed open. Adrian stood there, breathing hard, his clothes torn and blood-stained, his face pale beneath the bruises. He was at her side in 3 strides, taking her hand. He said he was there and apologized, saying he came as soon as Dmitri called. She touched his face, feeling the swelling along his jaw, and told him he was hurt. He dismissed it, saying it was nothing. He asked how she and Charlotte were. She said Charlotte was coming soon, she thought. Another contraction hit, and Mara gripped his hand hard enough to make him wince. She told him he shouldn't be here. He replied that the coalition could wait, but she couldn't. Victor was handling the situation. He was exactly where he needed to be. The doctor entered, checked her progress, and nodded with satisfaction. He said she was at 8 centimeters, and it wouldn't be long now. Terror and excitement warred in Mara's chest. She said she wasn't ready, that she thought she'd have more time to prepare. Adrian's voice was certain. He told her she was ready, that she was the strongest person he knew and she could do this. The next 2 hours blurred together in a haze of pain and effort. Adrian stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, being the steady anchor she desperately needed. The nurses tried to make him leave to clean up and rest, but one look at his face shut down those suggestions immediately. Finally, after what felt like both an eternity and an instant, the doctor said the words Mara had been waiting for. One more push. You're almost there. Mara bore down with everything she had, Adrian's hand locked in hers, his voice in her ear telling her she could do this, that she was amazing, she was almost done. And then, cutting through the pain and exhaustion, a new sound filled the room, a baby crying. The doctor announced it was a girl holding up a tiny, perfect creature covered in blood and vernix. He commented on her healthy lungs. They placed Charlotte on Mara's chest, and the entire world narrowed to that one small life. She was perfect, impossibly small, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right through Mara into her soul. Her cries softened as she felt her mother's heartbeat, her tiny fist curling around Mara's finger with surprising strength. Mara whispered, "Hello, Charlotte, I'm your mama. I've been waiting to meet you," with tears streaming down her face. She looked up to find Adrian staring at the baby with naked wonder on his face. All his carefully controlled masks had fallen away, leaving only raw emotion. He breathed that she was perfect. Mara asked if he wanted to hold her. Adrian hesitated, something almost like fear flickering across his face. He said he didn't want to hurt her. Mara assured him he wouldn't. She shifted carefully, offering Charlotte to him, telling him to support her head. Adrian took the baby with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. Charlotte seemed impossibly tiny in his large, scarred hands. She blinked up at him, her cries stopping entirely, and something broke in Adrian's expression. He said softly, "Hello, little one. I'm Adrian. I'm going to keep you safe for the rest of your life. That's a promise." Watching him hold Charlotte, seeing the fierce protectiveness and love on his face, Mara fell even deeper in love with him. This was the man beneath the violence and power, the man who'd lost his own daughter and had just been given the chance to be a father again. Adrian said quietly that she looked like her, the same nose and chin. Mara added that she thought she had Marcus's eyes, the shape of them. Adrian replied that then she had the best of both of them. He touched Charlotte's tiny hand, and she gripped his finger just as she'd gripped Mara's. He said she was going to be beautiful, and strong and fierce, just like her mother. The moment was shattered by Dimitri bursting through the door, his gun out. "We have a situation." He stopped short, seeing the baby. "Oh." Adrian's expression hardened instantly, the mask sliding back into place. He asked what the situation was. Dimitri explained it was the coalition. They'd tracked him here and were coming. He glanced at Mara apologetically. He said there were maybe 20 men, heavily armed, and they'd be there in 10 minutes. Fear spiked through Mara's exhaustion. They were coming to the hospital. Adrian handed Charlotte back to Mara with obvious reluctance. He said they were desperate. They knew if they couldn't beat him in the city, they needed to strike where he was vulnerable. Mara told him to leave, to go handle them, that she and Charlotte were safe here. Adrian's voice was cold steel. "You're not safe anywhere until this ends, and it ends tonight." He turned to Dimitri. "How many men do we have?" Dimitri said they had 15 in the building and another 10 en route. Adrian noted it wasn't enough, that they were outnumbered and had surprise. His jaw tightened. "But we have home advantage and motivation. Position men on every entrance. Lock down this floor completely. No one gets to Mara and Charlotte." "Understood?" Dimitri said, "Yes, sir." Adrian looked back at Mara, his expression softening. "I'm sorry. This should have been a perfect moment." Mara shifted Charlotte in her arms, looking up at the man she loved with absolute faith. "Instead, you're going to go out there and end this. Do what you have to do. We'll be here when you're done." Adrian cupped her face, kissing her with desperate intensity. Then he pressed a gentle kiss to Charlotte's forehead. "I love you both, more than life itself." He straightened, his hand moving to the gun holstered at his back. He told her to lock the door behind him and not to open it for anyone but him or Dimitri. Then he was gone, Dimitri at his shoulder, leaving Mara alone with her newborn daughter and the sound of men preparing for battle in the hallway outside. A young, terrified, but determined nurse appeared. She said she was staying with her, that it was hospital policy during a lockdown. Mara told her she should go, that it wasn't safe. The nurse, checking Mara's vitals with shaking hands, said that she had just had a baby and needed medical monitoring. Besides, she had volunteered. Mr. Volkov had saved her brother from a drug debt 2 years ago, and she owed him. Mara wanted to argue, but another afterbirth pain made her gasp. The nurse helped her through it, then settled into the chair beside the bed with the kind of fake calm that came from terror barely suppressed. Charlotte slept through it all, peaceful in her mother's arms, unaware that violence was coming for them. Gunfire erupted 10 minutes later. Mara heard it even through the locked door. Sharp cracks that echoed through the hospital corridors. There was shouting, running footsteps, and more gunfire, closer now. She held Charlotte tighter, curling her body protectively around her daughter. If they came through that door, if they somehow got past Adrian and his men, she would fight. She'd never fought for anything in her life, but she would fight for Charlotte. The door handle rattled. Mara's heart stopped. A voice said it was Victor and to let him in. She recognized his voice. The nurse unlocked the door, and Victor slipped inside, blood on his shirt but moving steadily. He locked the door again immediately. The nurse asked for a status update. Victor, positioning himself between the door and Mara, said they were holding them on the stairwell. They had brought more men than expected, but Mr. Volkov was handling it. The way he said handling it suggested things Mara didn't want to imagine too closely. There was more gunfire, a scream cut short, then a terrifying silence. Mara counted her heartbeats. Charlotte stirred in her arms, making small sounds that might become crying. The nurse offered to take her, but Mara shook her head. She couldn't let go. Not now. The silence stretched. 1 minute, 2-5. Then footsteps in the hallway, slow, steady, coming closer. Victor raised his gun. The nurse moved to stand in front of Mara and Charlotte, and Mara held her breath, praying with everything she had. A knock. 3 sharp raps. It was Adrian's voice. "Mara, it's me. Open the door." Mara nearly collapsed with relief. Victor checked the peephole, then unlocked the door. Adrian entered, and Mara bit back a gasp. He was covered in blood, his clothes, his face, his hands. His knuckles were raw and bleeding. There was a gash across his cheek that would definitely scar. But his eyes, when they met hers, were clear, focused, and alive. He said simply, "It's over. The coalition is broken. Their leaders are dead. The survivors have surrendered. Victor asked if it was all of them. Adrian confirmed every single one. He moved to the sink, washing blood from his hands with methodical precision. He said Klav, Petrov, and Sokov were all dead. Their operations would be absorbed into theirs. Their men had the choice to swear loyalty or leave the city. Most would choose loyalty. The nurse's voice was awed. You killed them all yourself. Adrian's voice was flat. They came to my family's hospital room on the night my daughter was born. What did they think would happen? He finished washing, then came to Mara's bedside. She should have been horrified by the violence, by the cold calculation in his voice. Instead, she felt protected and loved. Adrian asked if Charlotte was okay. Mara said she was perfect, sleeping through everything like nothing happened. She shifted, making room on the bed, and told him to sit, that he looked like he was about to fall over. Adrian sank onto the edge of the mattress, careful not to jostle her. His hand found Charlotte's tiny head, stroking her dark hair with infinite gentleness. He said quietly that he thought he was going to lose them both, when Dmitri called and said she was in labor, and then that the coalition was coming. He'd never been that afraid in his life. She told him he won. He replied that he had to, that losing wasn't an option. Adrian looked up, his gray eyes burning into hers. You and Charlotte, you're my whole world now. I would burn this entire city to ash before I let anyone hurt you. The ferocity in his voice should have been terrifying. Instead, it made Mara feel cherished beyond measure. She said softly, no more burning cities. You promised you'd go legitimate, that we'd have a peaceful life. He said he would keep that promise. The coalition's destruction gave him the leverage he needed. Other families would fall in line or leave. In 6 months, maybe a year, he could step back from the violent side of the business completely. Adrian's hand moved from Charlotte to cover Mara's. We'll have that peaceful life. I swear it. Charlotte chose that moment to wake up, her eyes blinking open to focus on Adrian's face. She didn't cry, just studied him with that intense newborn stare. Mara whispered that Charlotte knew him. Adrian replied that she knew he was hers, just like he was Mara's. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to Mara's forehead. Marry me. The words hung in the air. Mara stared at him, certain she'd heard wrong. What Adrian's voice was fierce. Marry me. I know it's fast. I know we've only been together a few weeks, but I've never been more certain of anything. I love you. I love Charlotte. I want to build a life with you. Raise her together. Give her brothers and sisters if you'll have me. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're mine and I'm yours. So marry me, Mara, please. Tears streamed down Mara's face. She pointed out that he was proposing in a hospital room, covered in blood, while she looked like she'd been hit by a truck. Adrian's smile was tender. He said he was proposing in the room where their daughter was born. On the night, he proved he'd do anything to protect them both. This was the perfect moment, the only moment that mattered. Mara looked down at Charlotte, then back up at Adrian. 6 months ago, she'd been a struggling waitress with no future and no hope. Now she held a beautiful baby girl in her arms and had a man who'd moved heaven and earth to keep them safe. It was insane. It was impossible. It was everything she'd never dared to dream, she whispered. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Adrian's smile transformed his entire face. He kissed her, careful and tender, despite the violence still clinging to him. When they broke apart, Charlotte was watching them both with those dark, serious eyes. Adrian told her, welcome to the family, little one. I promise you're going to have the best life I can give you. Safety, love, every opportunity in the world, and you'll never, ever have to be afraid. Charlotte's tiny hand reached out, grabbing Adrian's finger with that same surprising strength. And in that moment, watching the most dangerous man she'd ever met melt under the grip of a newborn, Mara knew everything was going to be okay. The war was over. Charlotte was safe, and their future, strange and unlikely and beautiful, was just beginning. The hospital kept Mara and Charlotte for 3 days. The doctors said it was standard procedure for early deliveries, but Mara suspected Adrian had something to do with the extended stay. He wanted them under medical supervision, protected by walls and guards. While he finished cleaning up the aftermath of the war, he visited every day, always arriving with gifts, flowers, books, and tiny outfits for Charlotte that were far too expensive for a newborn who would outgrow them in weeks. On the second day, he brought a velvet box that made Mara's breath catch. He said he knew they hadn't set a date, but he wanted her to have this. He wanted her to know that his proposal was real, and that he meant every word. He opened it to reveal a ring that caught the light like captured fire. The diamond was stunning, an emerald cut surrounded by smaller stones that formed a delicate flower pattern. It was the kind of ring Mara had only ever seen in magazines, on the hands of women who lived in different worlds. She told Adrian it was too much. He replied that nothing was too much, not for her. He slipped it onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Of course it did. Adrian left nothing to chance. He asked if she liked it. She said she loved it, but was afraid to wear it. She was worried Charlotte might grab it and she'd lose a stone. Adrian's smile was soft. He said he'd just buy her another ring. Money was just money, but she and Charlotte were irreplaceable. By the third day, Charlotte had passed all her health checks with flying colors. The doctors pronounced her perfectly healthy despite the early arrival, and Mara was cleared to go home. Home, she thought with a surge of warmth. Not her apartment anymore. Adrian's home. Their home. The penthouse Adrian had kept carefully separate from her life until now was a revelation. It was the top 2 floors of a building in the historic district, with soaring ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a living painting. But unlike the cold, sterile luxury Mara had expected, the space was warm and lived in. Books lined the shelves, and the furniture looked comfortable rather than merely expensive. Adrian, carrying Charlotte's car seat, said he knew it was a lot. But he'd had the second floor completely renovated. There was a nursery, a room for her, whatever she needed. Mara turned to look at him. A room for me? We're engaged, Adrian. I assumed we'd be sharing a room. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise? Maybe. Or relief. He said he didn't want to presume. After everything she'd been through, he thought she might want her own space. Mara moved closer, careful not to jostle Charlotte, who was sleeping peacefully in her carrier. She said she wanted to be with him in every way that matters, and asked if that was okay. He replied that it was more than okay. Adrian set down the carrier and pulled Mara into his arms, holding her like she was something precious. He just wanted her to be comfortable, to never feel pressured or obligated. She said she didn't feel pressured. She felt cherished, safe, home. The kiss that followed was gentle, unhurried, and full of promise. When they broke apart, Charlotte was watching them with those serious dark eyes, as if cataloging every detail of her new life. The nursery Adrian had prepared took Mara's breath away. It had soft gray walls, white furniture, and delicate touches of pale pink that somehow avoided being cloying. A rocking chair sat by the window, perfect for late-night feedings. The crib was hand-carved wood, beautiful and sturdy, with a mobile of stars and moons hanging above it. Adrian admitted that Elena had helped, that he knew nothing about babies. She had guided him through what they would need. Mara said it was perfect. She touched the soft blankets, the tiny clothes already hanging in the closet. She asked how long he had been planning this. He said since the day he asked her to marry him. He wanted everything ready when she came home. He lifted Charlotte from her carrier, cradling her with the easy confidence he'd developed over 3 days of practice. He wanted her to know from the very beginning that she was loved, that she belonged here. Watching him hold Charlotte, seeing the fierce protectiveness and genuine love on his face, Mara felt her last doubts dissolve. This was right. Strange and unlikely, and born from tragedy, but undeniably right. The first weeks of Charlotte's life fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Mara awoke every few hours to feed her, with Adrian hovering nearby with bottles and burp cloths. He had the kind of focused attention he probably brought to business deals. He was surprisingly good with the baby, patient through crying jags, gentle during diaper changes, and endlessly fascinated by every small milestone. One day, he announced with the pride of someone who'd just closed $1 million deal that she had smiled at him that morning. A real smile, not just gas. Mara pointed out that she was 3 weeks old, and it was definitely gas. He was utterly convinced it was a smile, and Mara didn't have the heart to argue. Elena visited often, always bringing food and wisdom in equal measure. She'd become something like a grandmother to Charlotte, cooing over her in Russian and teaching Mara songs from the old country. One afternoon, while Adrian was at a meeting, Elena told Mara she was good for him. They sat in the living room, Charlotte sleeping in Mara's arms. Elena said she'd never seen him like this, soft and happy. Mara said quietly that he was still dangerous, that she wasn't naive about what he did. Elena agreed, but said Mara saw all of him, the violence and the tenderness, and loved him anyway. That was rare. Elena's eyes were gentle, and he loved her the same way, completely and without reservation. It was true. Adrian had opened himself to Mara in ways she suspected he'd never done with anyone, even his first wife. He told her about the nightmares that still woke him sometimes, dreams of fire and loss. He told her about the guilt he carried for every person he'd hurt, every life he'd taken. He told her about his determination to build something better, something clean for Charlotte to inherit. One night, as they lay in bed, with Charlotte asleep in the nursery and the monitor on the nightstand, he confessed that he didn't want her to know what he was. He wanted to be legitimate before she was old enough to understand. Before she could ask questions he didn't want to answer. Mara turned to face him. She told him to make it happen, that he had the power and resources. She asked what was stopping him. He said it was obligations, alliances, people who depended on the current structure. His jaw tightened, but he was working on it. Every day he was shifting more assets into legitimate businesses, the galleries, the import companies, real estate. In a year, maybe 18 months, he could step back from the rest, and until then, he would do what he had to do to keep them safe. He pulled her closer, but the violence was ending. No more wars, no more bloodshed, just quiet management until he could hand it all off to Victor and walk away. Mara believed him. She saw the changes happening. There were fewer late-night calls, more business meetings in actual offices instead of abandoned warehouses. Adrian was keeping his promise, transforming himself one decision at a time. When Charlotte was 6 weeks old, Adrian brought up the wedding. Over breakfast, he said he wanted to marry her soon. Charlotte was in her bouncer, making the gurgling sounds that had become her favorite form of communication. He suggested a small ceremony, just them and the people who mattered most. He asked about next month, saying he knew it was fast, but he didn't want to wait. He wanted to make this official, to give Charlotte a family legally and completely. Mara thought about it. She had no family left to invite, no friends beyond Elena and a few women from the gallery. A small ceremony made sense. More than that, it felt right. She agreed to next month, but with one condition. Adrian raised an eyebrow and told her to name it. She said she wanted to adopt Charlotte legally as her daughter, and she wanted him to adopt her too. Not just claim her, but actually legally become her father. She asked if they could do that. Something raw and beautiful crossed Adrian's face. He asked if she wanted him to be her father officially. She replied that he already was in every way that mattered. This just made it legal, made her his. Mara reached across the table to take his hand. She said Marcus gave her life, but he was giving her everything else. Love, safety, a future. He deserved to be her father. Adrian's eyes were suspiciously bright. He said yes, they would do it all at once. Get married, adopt Charlotte, and start fresh as a real family. The lawyers Adrian employed made it happen with remarkable speed. Adoption papers were filed, background checks were completed, and home studies were conducted by social workers who looked terrified of Adrian, but had to admit he'd created the perfect environment for a child. The wedding license was obtained, and Elena took charge of planning the actual ceremony, with the kind of efficiency that suggested she'd been waiting for this moment for years. She declared it would be small and intimate on the penthouse terrace at sunset, with maybe 20 guests. Mara would wear something simple but beautiful, and Adrian would cry. Adrian protested that he wouldn't cry. Elena patted his hand and assured him he absolutely would, and that it would be lovely. She was right about everything except the guest count. When the day arrived, there were maybe 15 people total. Victor and Dmitri, both looking uncomfortable in suits. Pavle and a few other guards who'd become something like friends. Elena, of course, and 2 of her daughters who'd flown in from Boston. The judge who would perform the ceremony, a photographer to capture the moment, and Charlotte, dressed in a ridiculously elaborate white gown for a 2-month-old, sleeping peacefully in Elena's arms. Mara stood in the bedroom, looking at herself in the mirror. Her dress was simple, ivory silk that flowed over her still recovering body, elegant without being fussy. Her hair was down the way Adrian liked it. The ring on her finger caught the light. She looked like a bride. She felt like someone else's life had somehow become hers. Elena appeared in the doorway, Charlotte stirring in her arms. She said everyone was waiting and asked if Adrian was nervous. Mara replied that he was terrified, pacing for 20 minutes. Elena's smile was warm. She said that the moment he saw her, all of that would disappear. She was right. When Mara stepped onto the terrace, it had been transformed with flowers and soft lighting. The city spread out below them in the golden hour. Adrian turned, and his entire face transformed. The fear vanished, replaced by something so tender it made Mara's throat tight. She walked to him without music or ceremony, just the sound of the evening wind and the city below. When she reached him, he took her hands, his voice rough with emotion. He told her she was beautiful. She replied that he was too. The judge cleared his throat, clearly amused, and asked if they should begin. The ceremony was short and perfect, traditional vows with a few personal additions. Adrian promised to protect and cherish not just Mara, but Charlotte. Mara promised to stand beside Adrian through whatever challenges lay ahead. When the judge pronounced them married, Adrian's kiss was gentle and reverent, full of promise. Then came the adoption. The judge had agreed to perform both ceremonies together, making it official in one perfect moment. Adrian and Mara signed the papers. Charlotte's birth certificate was amended, and suddenly they were a family, legal and complete. The judge read from the new certificate. Charlotte Elena Volov, daughter of Adrian Volkov and Mara Volkov. Congratulations. Adrian took Charlotte from Elena, holding her up so she could see everyone gathered. He said, "Hear that, little one? You're ours now, officially and forever." Charlotte, with impeccable timing, smiled. A real smile this time, no question about it. The guests laughed, and Adrian's eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. Mara whispered that Elena was right. He was crying. He replied that tears of joy don't count, but he was smiling through them, looking down at Charlotte with absolute devotion. The reception was casual, with food, champagne, and surprisingly heartfelt toasts from Victor. As the sun set and the city lights came on below them, Adrian pulled Mara onto the makeshift dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. He said quietly that he never thought he'd have this again, a wife, a daughter, a real family. He thought that part of his life was over, and now he had everything. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. He told her she saved him from becoming the monster he was turning into, that she gave him a reason to be better. Mara touched his face. She said they saved each other. She was drowning before he found her, and he gave her a life worth living. He replied, "Then let's make it the best life possible for us and for Charlotte for whatever comes next." The months that followed were the happiest of Mara's life. She watched Charlotte grow from a tiny newborn into a baby with a personality. She was laughing, reaching for everything, and responding to her name with bright-eyed attention. Adrian was there for every milestone, documenting each one with the focused intensity he brought to everything. And slowly, steadily, he kept his promise about going legitimate. The criminal enterprises were transferred to Victor's management, with Adrian remaining as a silent partner who collected profits but made no decisions. The legitimate businesses grew. New galleries opened, the import company expanded, and real estate investments flourished. By Charlotte's first birthday, Adrian had achieved what he'd set out to do. He was on paper and in practice a legitimate businessman, wealthy, powerful, but legal. The violence was behind them. The night they celebrated Charlotte's birthday with a small party, Mara said she couldn't believe he actually did it. Their daughter sat in her high chair, chocolate cake smeared across her face, laughing as Victor made funny faces. Adrian pulled Mara close and said he told her he would. He had promised her peace, a normal life, and he didn't break his promises. She asked about Victor and the others who were still running things. He explained they knew the rules. No violence that traced back to him or his family, and no operations that could endanger Charlotte. They stepped carefully because they knew if they didn't, he'd step back in. Adrian's voice hardened slightly. He might be legitimate now, but he hadn't forgotten how to be dangerous. They wouldn't test him. Mara believed him. She'd seen that danger firsthand and knew what Adrian was capable of when protecting what he loved. But she'd also seen his gentleness, his capacity for love, and his determination to be better. He was both things at once, dangerous and tender, ruthless and kind, and somehow, impossibly, he was hers. 2 years after Charlotte's birth, Mara found herself standing in the new gallery Elena had helped them open. It was larger than the first one, in a better location, and filled with art that spoke to Mara's developing eye. She was the manager now, having learned everything Elena could teach her, and then some. Elena appeared at her elbow, saying she'd done well for herself. She'd officially retired 6 months ago, but still visited regularly to critique and advise. She said the collection was excellent, and that a piece by a new artist, Rivera, was going to sell for triple what she paid within the year. Mara said Elena had taught her well. Elena replied that she taught her the basics, and the rest was all her. Elena's smile was proud. She'd become exactly what Elena always knew she could be. Strong, confident, and successful on her own terms. It was true. Mara barely recognized herself anymore when she looked in mirrors. The scared, struggling waitress was gone, replaced by a woman who ran a successful gallery, raised a brilliant daughter, and loved a man who'd moved heaven and earth to give her the life she deserved. That evening, Adrian picked her up from work as he often did. Charlotte was with them, 3 years old now, and chattering constantly about everything she saw. She pointed at a golden retriever and asked for a doggie. Adrian, who'd insisted Charlotte call him Papa, from the moment the adoption was finalized, pretended to consider it seriously. He said maybe when she was a little older, that dogs were a big responsibility. She promised she'd be responsible. Mara and Adrian exchanged amused looks over her head. These were the moments that mattered. Not the dramatic rescues or violent confrontations, but the simple, everyday joy of being a family. That night, after Charlotte was asleep, Adrian brought Mara out to the terrace where they'd been married. The city glittered below them, beautiful and vast. He said he'd been thinking about expanding the family. Mara's heart skipped. He said Charlotte was 3, the perfect age for a sibling. His hand rested on her stomach, hopeful. He asked what she thought if she was ready to do it again. Mara thought about pregnancy, labor, and sleepless nights with a newborn. Then she thought about Charlotte's joy, about the family they'd built, about giving their daughter a sibling to grow up with. She said simply, "Yes, let's have another baby." Adrian's smile was brilliant. He kissed her deeply, and Mara felt the future unfold before them, full of possibility and hope and love. 9 months later, Mara gave birth to a son they named Alexander, after Adrian's father. Charlotte was fascinated by her baby brother, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to bottle feedings. Adrian was, if possible, even more devoted the second time around, splitting his attention between both children with practiced ease. One night, as they watched Charlotte read a story to baby Alexander in her careful, serious way, he confessed he never imagined this. After he lost his first family, he thought he'd never have the noise, the chaos, the overwhelming love again. He said she gave that back to him. Mara leaned against him and said they gave it to each other, that none of this would exist without both of them. 5 years passed. Charlotte started school, a private institution where she excelled in everything she touched, just as both her parents had predicted. Alexander grew into a rambunctious toddler who kept everyone on their toes. The gallery expanded again, until Mara found herself running a small empire of her own. Adrian transformed completely. The man who'd once ruled through fear and violence became known instead as a shrewd businessman, a devoted father, and a philanthropist who funded arts programs and women's shelters throughout the city. He never spoke of his past, and those who knew didn't dare mention it. He'd become exactly what he'd promised, legitimate, peaceful, focused on building rather than destroying. On their 7th anniversary, Mara and Adrian stood on the same terrace where they'd been married. Their children were asleep inside. Charlotte, now 8, was brilliant and fierce, everything Mara had hoped she'd be. Alexander, 5, was sweet and curious, and absolutely convinced he could do anything his big sister could do. Mara asked if he ever regretted giving up the power and control. He said never, not for a single second. He pulled her close. He gave up power over strangers, and in exchange, he got everything that actually matters. Her, their children, a life worth living instead of just surviving. Mara said quietly that Marcus would have been amazed to see what Charlotte became. She thought about Charlotte's biological father sometimes, less often as the years passed, but still. Adrian's voice was certain. He said she became herself, strong and smart, and loved beyond measure. Marcus gave her life, but they gave her everything else. And if he could see her now, he thought he'd be grateful. Maybe he would have been. Mara would never know. But she knew Charlotte was happy, thriving, surrounded by love and opportunity. That was what mattered. Mara admitted that when she was working at the diner, barely surviving, she used to dream about escaping. She used to imagine winning the lottery or meeting someone who would save her. But she never imagined anything like marrying a reformed criminal and running an art empire. She turned to face Adrian. She had married the love of her life, had children who filled every day with joy, built something meaningful that was entirely hers, and found home in the most unlikely place possible. Adrian agreed. It was unlikely, but perfect. He kissed her as the city lights sparkled around them, and Mara felt the truth of that statement settle into her bones. Their story had been unlikely from the beginning, born from tragedy and violence. It was built on protection that transformed into love, but it was theirs, and it was perfect. Inside, Charlotte called out for water. Alexander started crying, probably having woken his sister with his movement. The beautiful moment shattered into the beautiful chaos of family life. Adrian laughed, pulling Mara toward the door. "Come on, our children need us. Our children always need us." And isn't that wonderful? It was. All of it. The sleepless nights and sticky fingers and constant noise, the gallery openings and school plays and family dinners. The quiet moments stolen between chaos where Mara and Adrian remembered why they'd chosen this life together. Years later, when Charlotte graduated from high school at the top of her class, Mara sat in the audience with Adrian on one side and Alexander, now 13 and already taller than her, on the other. She watched her daughter cross the stage, confident and brilliant, and thought about the journey that had brought them there. A car accident that should have been the end had become a beginning. A pregnancy that seemed like a disaster had become the greatest gift. A dangerous man had become the best father and husband she could have imagined. Adrian whispered that she looked like her, with the same determination and fire. Mara corrected him. "She looks like herself, like everything we hoped she'd be." Charlotte found them in the crowd after the ceremony, throwing her arms around both parents with the unselfconscious affection of a girl who'd never doubted she was loved. She said she did it. Adrian's voice was thick with pride as he said they never doubted she would, and that Yale was lucky to have her. Charlotte pulled back, her eyes bright, saying she was going to miss them all so much, but she'd come home for holidays and call every week. Mara cupped her daughter's face and told her to go live her life, that they would be right here whenever she needed them. That night, after the celebration dinner and the guests had gone home, Mara stood in Charlotte's room. It was decorated in the sophisticated style of a young woman, nothing like the pink nursery it had once been. Pictures covered the walls: Charlotte and Alexander, family vacations, school achievements, and on the nightstand, in a small silver frame, was a photo she had placed there years ago of Marcus Chen, young and smiling before everything went wrong. The only picture Charlotte had of her biological father. Adrian said from the doorway that he told her the truth when she was 12, that he wasn't her biological father, that her birth father had died before she was born, but that he'd loved her. Mara asked what she said. He replied that she said she knew, that Mara had told her stories about Marcus when she was younger, that he was smart and charming and would have loved her very much. Adrian moved to stand beside Mara, and then she said it didn't matter, that he was her real father because he was the one who raised her. Mara leaned against him. "You are her real father, in every way that counts." Adrian's arm came around her. He said he knew, but he was glad she knew the truth, that Marcus wasn't erased, just remembered kindly. She deserved to know where she came from, even if where she's going is so much brighter. They stood in silence, looking at the room that represented Charlotte's childhood, ending now as she prepared to leave for college. It was bittersweet, watching her grow up and away. But it was also beautiful. They'd given her wings, and now she would fly. The years continued to unfold. Alexander followed Charlotte to an excellent university, choosing business over his sister's love of art history. The galleries continued to thrive, expanding into new cities. Adrian's legitimate empire grew, and with it, his reputation transformed completely. He became known not for his dangerous past, but for his philanthropic present, funding scholarships, supporting the arts, and creating opportunities for people who reminded him of Mara, struggling and deserving better. On their 20th anniversary, Mara and Adrian returned to the mountain safe house where they'd weathered the storm of the coalition's attack. It had been transformed over the years into a family retreat, the fortress becoming a peaceful escape. Mara stood at the same window where she'd once waited in terror for Adrian to return from battle and said it was hard to believe it had been 20 years. Adrian smiled. 20 years since I proposed, covered in blood in a hospital room. Most romantic proposal ever. Mara said it was perfect for them. She turned to face him, seeing the silver threading through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes that came from laughter more than stress. Everything about us was perfect for us, even when it seemed insane. Adrian pulled her close, especially when it seemed insane. I'm grateful for every moment, every challenge, every joy. All of it led us here. Here was everything they'd built together. Children who were thriving, businesses that gave them purpose, a life that had transformed from survival to genuine flourishing, love that had been tested and proven unbreakable. She asked if he ever missed the power, the danger. He replied, "No, I have everything I want right here." He kissed her forehead. Power is just a tool. What matters is what you build with it, and we built something beautiful. They had, against all odds, despite every obstacle, they'd created a life that was worth every struggle it had taken to get there. That evening, Charlotte called from her job at a museum in New York. Alexander video chatted from his internship in London. Both of them were happy, successful, loved, and loving. Mara said as they ended the calls that they did good. Adrian replied, "We did better than good. We did extraordinary." He pulled her into his arms on the terrace, the mountains rising around them under a sky full of stars. And it's not over. We have years ahead of us, more memories to make, more love to share. Mara leaned into his embrace, feeling the truth of those words settle deep in her heart. Their story had started with tragedy, a car crash, a pregnancy, a dangerous bargain. But it had become so much more. It had become a love story for the ages, not the kind found in fairy tales, but something real and hard-won and infinitely precious. Two broken people who'd found each other in the darkness and built a light bright enough to guide them home. Mara whispered, "I love you." Adrian replied, "I love you more. Impossible. Want to bet?" They argued about it playfully as they headed inside, their laughter echoing in the mountain air. And somewhere in the city below, the empire they'd built together continued its quiet work, helping people, creating beauty, making the world just a little bit better than they'd found it. Charlotte Volkov grew up to run her own museum, creating opportunities for young artists who needed them. Alexander Volkov built ethical businesses that treated employees fairly and gave back to communities. And Mara and Adrian Volkov grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year, proving that even the most unlikely beginnings could lead to the most beautiful endings. Their story had started with a collision, metal and glass and shattered lives, but it had transformed into something no one could have predicted. A family built on choice rather than obligation, love that conquered fear, peace that was earned through transformation rather than demanded through violence. When Mara looked back on it all, from the scared waitress she'd been to the confident woman she'd become, she understood that every moment, even the terrifying ones, had been necessary, had been perfect in its own way because it had led her here, to Adrian, to their children, to a life she'd never dared to dream, but now couldn't imagine living without. That was the real miracle. Not the dramatic rescues or violent confrontations or unlikely coincidences, but the simple, profound truth that love could transform everything, including two people who'd thought they were beyond saving. They'd saved each other, built each other up, and created something beautiful from the wreckage of what came before, and they lived happily ever after.